Section 1. The Nuclear Power Plant and the Mutation of Springfield. Get comfortable. Settle in. Pull the blanket up a little. Close your eyes if you want to, and let the words just wash over you. Because tonight we're going somewhere familiar. Somewhere yellow and warm and slightly broken in all the ways you remember. We're going to Springfield, and we're going to stay a while. The Simpsons has been on the air since the 17th of December, 1989. 36 seasons? Nearly 800 episodes. It is the longest-running American animated series ever made. The longest-running American sitcom. The longest-running scripted primetime show in the entire history of television. No other show comes close. Not even in the same conversation. And in all that time, across every single one of those episodes, nobody has aged a single day. Bart is still 10 years old. Lisa is still 8. Maggie is still working on that same pacifier. Homer still drives the same pink car to the same power plant to work for the same ancient billionaire who can't remember his name. Tonight we're going to talk about why. Not the surface answer. Not the casual shrug that says, oh, it's a cartoon, that's just how animated shows work. We're going to go deeper than that. Because when you actually sit with this show, when you spend time with its 36 years of detail, its buried callbacks, its unresolved storylines, its contradictions that never quite get explained away, something starts to take shape. Not an accident. A pattern? And the first pattern, the one that sits at the very foundation of everything else we're going to discuss tonight, starts with the building that dominates Springfield's skyline. The one with the cracked cooling towers and the permanent haze hanging around it. The Springfield Nuclear Power Plant. Now, the show has always played the power plant as a kind of background joke. It's the place Homer works. It's run by a comically evil billionaire. The safety standards are non-existent in the most obvious, cartoonish way possible. You're supposed to laugh and move on. But when you actually catalog what the show has told us about that facility, across dozens of episodes, over decades, the joke stops feeling like a joke. A surprise safety inspection of the plant once found 342 separate violations. 342? The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code was $56 million. Charles Montgomery Burns, the man who owns the plant, is a billionaire many times over. He could have written that check without flinching. He refused. Not because he couldn't afford it, but because fixing the violations would mean admitting they existed. And admitting they existed would mean someone might start asking questions about what those violations had already done to the people living downwind. The violations themselves are not minor bureaucratic paperwork issues. The show is specific about what they involve. Radioactive waste being dumped directly into bodies of water. Radioactive waste being left on children's playgrounds. Plutonium being used as a paperweight on somebody's desk. Cooling towers patched with chewing gum. Rats running through the lower levels of the facility, glowing faintly in the dark. And then there's the one the show drops almost casually, in the middle of a longer scene, and never comes back to. Skeletons. Human skeletons, found in the basement of the nuclear power plant. The show shows them to you. The inspector sees them. Nobody asks who they were. Nobody asks how they got there. Nobody launches an investigation into why there are human remains in the lower levels of an active reactor facility. The camera moves on, the scene ends, and Springfield goes about its day. The man responsible for preventing all of this, the person whose literal job description is to stand between Springfield and radioactive catastrophe, is Homer Simpson. The show's own creator has stated that Homer has an IQ of 55. In a later episode, it's revealed that Homer has had a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood, physically reducing his cognitive function for his entire adult life. He sleeps at his workstation. He eats donuts during meltdown warnings. At one point, he causes a minor nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core, not out of malice, but because he wanted to see if it would grow bigger. That is the safety inspector. That is the man standing between Springfield and whatever the plant has been leaking. The first visible evidence that something is going wrong in Springfield appears in Season 2. A three-eyed fish is pulled from a river near the power plant. The fish is named Blinky, and it immediately becomes a national news story within the show's universe. A candidate running for governor uses Blinky as evidence that Burns is poisoning the environment. Burns is forced to sit down on live television and eat the fish to prove it's harmless. He eats it, the town watches, and then Springfield moves on. Nobody tests the water. Nobody conducts a follow-up study. Nobody asks the obvious question that is sitting right there on the surface, which is this. If the fish downstream from the plant have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people drinking the same water? The show answers that question, in its own way, years later. Season 8, The Springfield Files. Homer is walking home through the woods near town one night when he sees something in the dark. A glowing figure. Luminous green, moving strangely, making sounds that don't quite match human speech. Homer, naturally, concludes it must be an alien. The episode builds toward a big reveal, complete with FBI agents and town hysteria and a full investigation. And the reveal, when it comes, is this. The alien is Mr. Burns. Burns has been undergoing a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so loaded with experimental compounds and radiation therapy, that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 1 more week. Without it, he dies. After each session, Burns wanders out of the facility in a dazed, euphoric state, stumbling through the woods in the dark, glowing. And the people of Springfield, who live in the shadow of a nuclear power plant, who have watched a 3-eyed fish pulled from their river, who drink water that runs past cracked cooling towers, see this glowing figure in the forest, and their first instinct is that it must be an extraterrestrial. Not radiation, not the plant, an alien. That's how deep the denial goes. The contamination is so normalized, so thoroughly baked into the background of Springfield's daily life, that when someone literally glows in the dark, the town doesn't connect it to the obvious source. The movie takes it further. In the Simpsons movie, Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point so severe that the Environmental Protection Agency determines the entire town must be sealed under a giant glass dome to prevent its pollution from spreading to the rest of the bog. Country, think about what that means. Really think about it. The United States government, operating within the logic of the show's own universe, looked at Springfield and concluded that the town was so toxic, so fundamentally saturated with contamination, that the only available solution was physical containment. They didn't evacuate. They didn't clean it up. They put a lid on it. Because Springfield wasn't just polluted. Springfield had become an environmental hazard to the surrounding region. And the people inside it, the people who have been drinking that water and breathing that air and living downwind of those cracked towers for decades, they're still inside when the dome goes up. Now look at the residents themselves. Look at them closely, not with the forgiving eye you use when you're watching the show and your brain has long since accepted what they look like. Look at them as though you're seeing them for the first time. Homer Simpson has a skull shape that doesn't match any known human anatomy. His eyes bulge. His overbite is extreme. He has 4 fingers on each hand, which is true of every Springfield resident, but that detail becomes stranger the longer you sit with it. His body can absorb punishment that would kill a normal person many times over. He has been shot, electrocuted, fallen off cliffs, been struck by cars, survived explosions, fallen from great heights, and walked away from every single one of them. His healing rate is not in the range of normal human recovery. His pain tolerance is so far beyond what biology allows that the show plays it as a joke, but it's the kind of joke that, if you squint at it, starts to look like a symptom. And Homer has worked inside that nuclear facility, in direct proximity to an active reactor, for the entirety of his adult life. Marge has the same bulging eyes, the same 4 fingers, and hair that grows straight up from her head in a tower that defies every known principle of gravity and physics. She has maintained it in that exact shape for 36 years without apparent effort. Marge herself was briefly employed at the nuclear power plant, directly exposed to the same facility, the same violations, the same leaking radiation that Homer contends with every working day. Their children were all born after both parents had already spent years living in Springfield's contaminated environment. Bart has the spiky hair that holds its shape without product of any kind. Lisa has the same hair in a slightly different shape. Maggie has it too. All of them were born in Springfield, raised in Springfield, drinking the same water, breathing the same air, eating food grown in the same soil. And every one of them displays physical characteristics that don't occur in normal human populations. Here is the detail that clicks everything into place. When guest characters appear in Springfield, when celebrities visit from outside the town, when characters arrive from somewhere else in the world, they look different. Not subtly different, fundamentally different. Their proportions are closer to natural human anatomy. Their eyes sit in their heads normally. Their features don't carry the particular set of distortions that marks every Springfield resident. The show has always played this off as an art style difference. Guest characters are drawn more realistically because they're not part of the regular cast. But within the logic of the show's own universe, there is an observable, visible difference between people who live inside Springfield and people who come from outside it. The people inside the contamination zone look one way. The people outside it look another. Even the animals carry the mark. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes as his owners. Blinky the fish has 3 eyes. The wildlife in and around Springfield shows clear evidence of mutation from the plant's runoff. The show tells you this directly. It shows you the 3-eyed fish and explains, through the plot of that episode, that this is what the radiation is doing to living organisms in Springfield's waterways. And then it expects you to accept that the exact same radiation has had no measurable effect on the humans drinking from those same waterways. Now here is where the theory grows teeth. Burns knows. The show makes this explicit, not through one smoking gun moment, but through the accumulated weight of what we're shown across multiple episodes. Burns funds private medical research. He has personal physicians who operate outside normal medical channels. He undergoes weekly treatments that keep him alive through what amounts to chronic radiation management. Burns understands radiation exposure better than anyone in Springfield because he is personally dependent on managing its effects in his own body. He has his own pharmaceutical infrastructure. He has the resources to synthesize experimental treatments. He knows what radiation does to biological systems at the cellular level because it is the thing keeping him alive. And he knows what his plant is doing to Springfield because he has been watching it happen for decades from the only position that grants him full visibility, the position of the person causing it. And Homer's continued employment, the thing that the show presents as a running gag about Burns's forgetfulness and Homer's improbable job security, that isn't an accident either. The show actually gives you the answer to this one, buried in an episode that most people watch and forget. When German investors briefly purchased the plant, the very first thing they did was fire Homer. They assessed him in about 30 seconds and let him go. The second thing they did was get an estimate for bringing the facility up to code, an estimate so large it nearly bankrupted them. Burns bought the plant back and immediately rehired Homer. A competent safety inspector would shut that plant down. Homer ensures the violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking, the water stays contaminated, and Burns maintains his monopoly over Springfield's power supply, its economy, and by extension, the population that depends on both. A population that, the radiation theory suggests, may be too cognitively affected by decades of exposure to clearly see what's happening around them. The crayon in Homer's brain is one of the show's most famous reveals. Season 12. The episode is called Homer, and the premise is that Homer discovers a crayon has been lodged in his frontal lobe since childhood, physically reducing his intelligence. When it's removed, Homer's IQ climbs dramatically. He becomes articulate, perceptive, capable of understanding and engaging with the world around him in ways he never could before. And it makes him miserable. He sees Springfield clearly, possibly for the first time, and what he sees is unbearable. So he asks to have the crayon put back. He chooses the fog. He chooses the comfortable limitation over the painful clarity. But the episode asks a question it never quite answers. How did a crayon get into a child's brain in the first place? And how did Homer go through his entire childhood, his entire adolescence, his entire adult life, visiting doctors in Springfield, receiving medical attention in Springfield, and not a single medical professional found a foreign object lodged in his skull? Either every doctor in Springfield is operating at a level of incompetence that beggars belief, or someone knew it was there and left it alone. And if Burns's influence extends into the town's healthcare infrastructure, if the medical establishment in Springfield is looking the other way while something steadily eats through its patient's cognitive function, then Homer's crayon isn't just a physical object. It's a symbol the show is using to point at something it can't address directly. The people of Springfield have something wrong with their brains. Something that keeps them slow and compliant and incapable of looking up at those cooling towers and asking the simplest possible question, why are we all like this? The radiation theory doesn't just explain one mystery about the Simpsons. It attempts to explain all of them, layered together. The characters don't age because their mutated biology has been altered at a level that affects normal cellular processes. The town resets after catastrophic events because the population's memory and critical thinking functions are compromised by chronic neurological damage. Homer survives things that should kill him because his body has adapted to radiation in ways that make him extremely durable but cognitively devastated. Burns stays alive because he has been managing his own radiation exposure for over a century with resources nobody else in town has access to. And nobody in Springfield questions any of it because the same environmental factor that changed their bodies also affected the part of their brains responsible for asking hard questions. Springfield, under this reading, isn't a quirky cartoon town. It's a contamination zone. Its residents aren't eccentric. They're symptomatic. And the nuclear power plant that dominates their skyline, that employs their neighbors and powers their homes and poisons their water, isn't a background prop. It's the cause. The origin point. The thing the entire show radiates outward from. Every yellow face, every bulging eye, every impossible recovery, every forgotten disaster, every reset to normal, it all traces back to those cracked cooling towers, leaking their invisible damage into the same water supply that feeds the same damaged brains that can't figure out why their fish have 3 eyes and their children were born with 4 fingers. The plant isn't just part of Springfield. The plant, if this theory holds, is Springfield. And nobody who lives there will ever be able to see that clearly enough to do anything about it, because the plant already made sure of that. Section 2. Homer's coma, the dream that never ended. Take a slow breath. We're going a little deeper now. And this next theory, the one we're going to sit with for a while, is the kind of idea that changes the way you see everything that came before it. Because what if the radiation theory is correct, but only inside the mind of a man who has been unconscious for over 30 years? Let's go back to the 1st of April, 1993. The 18th episode of the show's 4th season aired that night. It was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The episode's premise was built around an April Fool's prank gone wrong. Bart, in typical Bart fashion, escalates a series of pranks on Homer throughout the day, each one bigger than the last, until he takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and has it placed inside an industrial paint shaker. The pressure builds inside the can, and when Homer opens it, the explosion sends him to the hospital. While Homer is lying in his hospital bed, supposedly recovering, he notices a vending machine across the room. He wants a candy bar. He gets up to reach for it. The machine tips. And Homer Simpson, already weakened, already in a hospital bed, is crushed by a falling vending machine and goes into a coma. A real coma. Not a cutaway gag. Not a dream sequence presented as a dream sequence. The show treats it as a genuine medical event. Homer flatlines. The family rushes in, and Homer enters a clinically unconscious state. The episode ends with Homer waking up. Bart tearfully confesses at his bedside that the whole April Fool's escalation was his fault. Homer springs awake and immediately starts strangling his son. The family laughs. Homer laughs. Everything goes back to normal, or what passes for normal in Springfield. The show tells you he woke up, but before the credits roll, the episode drops a piece of information so quietly that most viewers absorb it and move on. During the coma, Homer lost 5% of his brain function. 5% gone, permanently, never returning. And when Homer is told this, his response is to laugh, while also saying, almost to himself, that he doesn't understand why he's laughing. The family finds this charming rather than alarming. The episode ends, and The Simpsons continues for 32 more years. Unless it doesn't. Unless Homer never woke up at all. This is the Homer coma theory. It is, by most measurements, the single most debated, most analyzed, most internally consistent fan theory in the entire history of the show. The basic premise, which originated in an early Reddit post, is simple enough to state in one sentence. Homer did not wake up from his coma in April 1993, and every episode that has aired since that date is a dream being generated by the mind of an unconscious man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General. Everything since that night. Every storyline, every character arc, every guest appearance, every impossible event, every season, all of it. A dream. The evidence, when you lay it out carefully, is genuinely unsettling. Start with the tone shift. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a recognizably grounded show. It was always a cartoon, always heightened, But the storylines dealt with things that felt like real human situations, viewed through a satirical lens. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge considers whether she's happy in her marriage. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher. Bart struggles with his grades and faces the possibility of being held back a year. These are stories about family life, about financial stress and marital tension and kids failing their classes and parents trying to hold everything together. The emotional core of the early show was built on things real families experience and recognize. The Simpsons, in its first 3.5 seasons, felt like it was about something true. After the coma episode, the show becomes something else entirely. Homer goes to space. He goes to space on an actual NASA mission. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society that runs the country. Homer discovers his mother is a fugitive radical living underground. Homer meets God, twice, in actual conversation. The show goes from a grounded family sitcom to something where the main character has traveled to dozens of countries, held hundreds of different jobs, befriended presidents and celebrities, and survived physical punishment that would destroy a military unit. The escalation is so dramatic that even casual fans have noticed the tonal shift. Anyone who has spent time in conversations about the show has encountered the question of when The Simpsons started to change. The coma theory offers a precise answer. The show didn't gradually drift. Homer's brain got worse. And as it got worse, the dream it generated got stranger. Here is the detail that, once you know it, sits with you. 6 months before the coma episode, in the season 4 premiere, Homer has a conversation with God. An actual face-to-face conversation. And during that conversation, God tells Homer that he will one day learn the meaning of life. But not yet. Homer's time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The coma theory reads that moment not as a quirky theological gag, but as a prophecy delivered to Homer by whatever his dreaming brain would later cast as God. His time was coming. And it did come. In the spring of 1993, in a hospital room in Springfield, in front of a vending machine with a faulty base, Homer's conscious life ended. Everything that followed was the dream. The aging problem is where the coma theory does something that no other explanation manages quite as elegantly. Nobody ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have not gained a wrinkle, not lost a step, not changed in any visible way despite 3.5 decades of in-universe time passing around them. The radiation theory says this is biological. Cartoon logic says this is just how animated shows work. The floating timeline explanation says the show's present is always the viewer's present, and the characters exist in a permanent now. But the coma theory has an answer that doesn't require any of those frameworks. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went to sleep in April 1993 and never woke up. Of course, his children don't age. His unconscious brain cannot imagine them growing older because he was never there to see it happen. His wife doesn't age because the last time he saw her, she looked exactly like that. His friends don't change because his memory of them is frozen at the moment the vending machine fell. Homer's coma dream preserves his world exactly as it was on the day he lost it, because that, in some fundamental sense, is what the dreaming mind does when it loses contact with waking time. It holds on to what it knew. It runs simulations using the only reference material it has, which is the world as it existed at the moment of loss. The celebrity appearances in later seasons make a different kind of sense under this theory. Homer's unconscious mind, lying in a hospital bed for decades, would be receiving input, ambient sound from the television in his room, voices from people visiting, news from radios down the hall. The dreaming brain, hearing names and voices from outside, would incorporate them. That's why later seasons are flooded with guest stars in a way the early show never was. Homer's brain is absorbing fragments of the world outside his coma and weaving them into the dream. Every celebrity who shows up in Springfield is a voice that reached Homer through the fog of unconsciousness and was translated into a dream character. The show itself has acknowledged this theory, though not in a way that confirms it. In season 34, a fake deleted scene was deliberately leaked in which Homer wakes up from a long coma, with the implication that every outlandish episode since season 4 was a dream. It was presented as a real scene, leaked by hackers, and the internet reacted. Then the show's producers confirmed it was a hoax, a piece of fiction planted intentionally. But the fact that they made it at all is telling. The writers animated a scene of Homer waking from a coma and then called it a joke. They showed the audience the thing the theory predicts and then said, "Just kidding, move along." The denial came wrapped inside the very thing being denied. And the audience laughed, in the same way Homer laughed when he was told about the 5%. Al Jean, a longtime executive producer on the show, addressed the theory directly in an interview around 2015. He said it isn't true. He dismissed it as fan speculation. But what he didn't do, and this is the thing the theory's proponents always point back to, is explain the tonal shift. He didn't explain why nobody ages. He didn't explain why God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the coma. He didn't explain why the show has grown progressively more surreal and detached from recognizable reality with each passing season, exactly as you'd expect from a dream being generated by a mind slowly losing its grip. He said it wasn't true. And the interviewer moved on. The fans didn't move on, because the theory does something no official explanation has ever done. It makes the show make sense. All of it. The frozen ages, the tonal shift, the escalating strangeness, the reset button that erases consequences between episodes. The fact that Homer can survive anything and recover from anything because nothing is actually happening to his body. His body is in a hospital bed. Only his mind is in Springfield. And his mind cannot kill him, because his mind is the one telling the story. There is a quieter version of this theory, and it's the one that stays with you the longest after you've thought it through. If the coma theory is true, then the emotional core of The Simpsons is not a comedy. It's something much closer to a tragedy. Because what Homer's dreaming brain keeps returning to, what it obsesses over across hundreds of episodes and decades of dream time, is the simplest thing in the world. He wants his family. That's all. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous little boy. He wants Lisa to play her saxophone. He wants Maggie to be small enough to hold. He wants the house on Evergreen Terrace, warm and a little chaotic. Friday night with the TV on and the family on the couch. And in the coma, the dream gives him all of it. Every single week, no matter what happens in the episode, no matter how catastrophic the events, by the end of 30 minutes, everything resets. The family is together. The house is intact. Homer is home. The dream does not let him lose his family, because losing them is the thing Homer's unconscious mind cannot process. So the dream keeps them exactly as they were, young, together, present. Homer's coma isn't a nightmare. Under this theory, it's the only heaven a man like Homer would ever have thought to ask for. A house where the kids are always young and the beer is always cold and the door is always there to walk through. And every time the credits roll, every time the reset happens and everything goes back to the way it was, it's not lazy writing. It's Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, if the simulation finally stops, then Homer has to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed in the real world, how old his children really are, whether Marge is still there, whether anyone is still sitting by his bed, or whether he doesn't wake up at all. Every episode of The Simpsons, under this theory, is a love letter, written by an unconscious man to the family he cannot reach, kept running by a brain that loves them too much to stop dreaming. The show will never confirm this, but it has never quite disproved it either, because the evidence isn't in a single episode. It's in the structure of the show itself, in the freeze, in the escalation, in the reset, in the way Springfield always feels like a place slightly outside of normal time, slightly detached from consequence, slightly too perfect in its imperfection to be real. Nobody ages in Springfield. Reality keeps getting stranger, and Homer always finds his way home by the end of the episode, because in the dream he never really left. Number Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Let your breathing slow down a little. We're going to talk about a mystery now. The greatest mystery in the history of this show. And the thing that makes it so compelling, the reason it still gets discussed 30 years later, is that the official answer might not be the right one. The summer of 1995 was the summer of one of the most ambitious things American television had ever attempted in an animated format. The Simpsons pulled off a genuine whodunit cliffhanger, a mystery designed with enough care and enough embedded misdirection that the show's creators invited viewers across the country to participate in a contest to guess the shooter. The winner would be animated into a real episode of the show. Fox promoted it like a cultural event. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special treating the fictional crime like a real unsolved case. The Simpsons, that summer, was a national puzzle, and the puzzle was this. Mr. Burns had finally gone too far. He'd stolen an oil well that happened to be sitting beneath the grounds of Springfield Elementary, gutting the school's budget in the process. He'd driven Moe's Tavern out of business. He'd created a sinkhole that destroyed the Springfield retirement castle where Grandpa Simpson lived. He'd injured Santa's little helper, the family's dog. And then, for his final act, he built a mechanical sun-blocking device and used it to plunge the entire town of Springfield into artificial darkness so that every resident would have no choice but to buy their electricity from his power plant. Not metaphorically, Burns literally stole the sunlight from Springfield. By the end of part 1 of Who Shot Mr. Burns, every single person in town had a reason to want the man dead. The show was careful about this. It built motives for dozens of characters, one by one, with deliberate patience. Homer, because Burns had spent years failing to remember the name of his own employee. Bart and Lisa, because their school lost its oil revenue. Grandpa, because his retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because Burns had cost him his job. Tito Puente, because Burns cut the music program. Moe, because his bar went under. Even Smithers, who had just been fired on the spot for daring to object to the sun-blocking device. The entire town gathered at a public meeting to confront Burns directly. Multiple characters were shown holding weapons. The tension in the room was the kind that only ends one way. And then Burns collapsed, a single gunshot wound. He staggered out onto the town sundial and fell, his hands landing on 2 letters, W and S. Or, from his perspective, looking upward, M and S. The ambulance came, the screen went dark, and America waited through an entire summer to find out who pulled the trigger. The answer, when Part 2 aired in September of 1995, was baby Maggie Simpson. According to Burns's account after waking from his coma, he had encountered Maggie in the parking lot following the town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun fell from its holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Chief Wiggum confirmed no jury in the world would convict a baby, possibly excepting Texas. The case was closed. Baby did it. Move on. Except the case was never really closed. The evidence doesn't add up cleanly. The more time you spend with it, the more the official answer starts to look like the convenient answer rather than the correct one. Start with the contest itself. Fox invited viewers across America to submit their guesses. Thousands of entries came in, and according to the DVD commentary for these episodes, from the writers who made the show, not a single person from the randomly selected sample of contest entries guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The prize was awarded randomly, and since that person hadn't gotten the right answer, they received a cash settlement instead of being animated into the show. The writers also acknowledged in that same commentary that there was one person who had posted the correct answer online on the night of the original broadcast. But that person was using a college internet account. By the time the contest ended and the producers tried to find them, the account was gone. They even put out an open call on the DVD release, inviting that person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Now, consider what that means. The show's creators told the public that the mystery was solvable from the clues in Part 1. They built a national contest around this premise. They promoted the solvability of it. And when the answer came, almost nobody had gotten it right. Either the clues were genuinely insufficient to lead a viewer to Maggie, or the red herrings were so effective that they overwhelmed the actual evidence, or the answer didn't follow logically from what Part 1 established the way the show implied it would. The clues themselves are worth examining. Burns falls on the sundial. His hands point to the letters W and S, which from his perspective become M and S. The show tells us this means Maggie Simpson. M for Maggie, S for Simpson. Mystery solved. Except Burns himself, canonically, in the episode, states that pointing his hands at those letters was not intentional. He didn't arrange himself to spell out his attacker's initials. He just fell. The sundial clue, the single most prominent piece of physical evidence in the episode, was explicitly described by the victim as a coincidence. The central clue doesn't actually mean anything, according to the central witness. Then there's the gun. Burns carried a gun in a holster. At some point before the shooting, the holster is shown empty. The gun was already missing from his person before he was attacked. Whoever shot Burns used his own weapon against him. This means the shooter was someone who had encountered Burns's gun by chance or taken it deliberately before the shooting occurred. Most of the suspects who gathered at the town meeting were already armed. They had brought weapons because they were angry enough at Burns to consider violence. The person who shot Burns was someone who wasn't carrying a weapon of their own, who found Burns's gun by chance and acted. A baby finding a gun on the ground does fit this profile, but so do many other people. Then there's Burns's last words before the shot. He said, "Oh, it's you." Not screamed in surprise. Not called out in fear. "Oh, it's you." The tone of a man recognizing someone he knows but doesn't consider a threat. The question is whether Burns would recognize Maggie Simpson in that particular way. The show has never really established a meaningful prior relationship between Burns and Maggie. Burns can barely remember Homer's name, and Homer has worked for him for decades. The idea that Burns would see this baby in a parking lot and respond with warm recognition doesn't track with the man the show has spent years establishing. Season 18 adds another complication. In an episode many fans have rewatched specifically because of this detail, Homer claims casually, out loud, that he was actually the one who shot Mr. Burns. He says it's on screen. Nobody in the scene reacts with particular alarm. Nobody reopens the investigation. Nobody contacts the police. Homer Simpson confesses to the attempted murder of the richest man in Springfield, and the show treats it like a throwaway line and moves on. Either Homer is lying for attention, which is entirely within his character, or the original verdict was wrong, and Homer knows it because he was there. The alternate endings are perhaps the most revealing piece of evidence, not about what happened, but about the writer's own uncertainty. A complete alternate conclusion was produced, fully animated, fully voiced, in which Smithers is revealed as the real shooter. This ending was shown in the 138th episode Spectacular, a clip show hosted by Troy McClure, who dismisses the Smithers ending by saying that ignoring the Simpson DNA evidence would be downright nutty. He references it as a winking callback to the O.J. Simpson trial, in which a jury acquitted despite DNA evidence. The show is explicitly telling you that ignoring DNA evidence happens in the real world, that official verdicts and factual reality don't always align, that the evidence can point wherever the people in power want it to point. An early draft of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers considered this option seriously for a time, thinking about what it would mean for Barney's character arc going forward, before abandoning it. The answer was not predetermined by the clues. The clues were adjusted to fit whatever answer the writers eventually selected. The mystery was assembled in reverse. Evidence was fitted to conclusion. One of the most compelling alternate readings comes from a theory that Marge was the real shooter. The case for this is surprisingly strong. Marge is a devoted mother who had watched Burns destroy her children's school, injure the family dog, and plunge her entire town into darkness. She had every possible reason to want him stopped. She's also a character the show has repeatedly shown to have a hidden reservoir of capability and determined action beneath her surface patience. And in an earlier episode, Burns falls briefly in love with Marge. He pursues her. He is genuinely infatuated. The theory suggests that when Burns was shot in that parking lot, he recognized Marge and chose not to name her. He protected her. He woke up from his coma, surveyed the room, and decided that pointing the investigation toward the woman he'd been infatuated with was not something he was willing to do. So he looked at the sundial. He saw the letters. And he gave Springfield a shooter who could never be punished. Maggie was the perfect candidate. A baby cannot be prosecuted. Chief Wiggum confirmed this himself. If someone in Springfield's power structure wanted to protect the real shooter, blaming the infant was the cleanest solution. She was too young to deny the accusation, too young to understand what she was being accused of, and too young to ever face consequences for it. The ideal fall person. The show knows all of this. The final shot of Part 2 has Maggie alone in the room after everyone else has left. She looks around carefully, checking that nobody is watching, and then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. The show presents this as confirmation. Maggie knows what she did, but you could read the same shot completely differently. A 1-year-old, having been present when someone else fired a gun, mimicking the action she witnessed. Because that's what babies do. They imitate what they see. She isn't confessing. She's remembering, recreating a moment she observed. The final shot is ambiguous in a way the show does not fully acknowledge. The question that nobody ever quite asks about this episode is broader than the specific identity of the shooter. In a town where every single person had a motive, where dozens of people showed up to a public meeting visibly armed, where the victim had just stolen sunlight from the entire community, how is it possible that only one person acted? Springfield is not known for restraint. These are people who riot over trivial disputes, who have burned down their own town hall over misunderstandings. When Mr. Burns blocks out the sun and threatens the ecological survival of every living thing in Springfield, one person pulls a trigger? One? Either Springfield's population is far more docile than the show has spent years establishing, or the shooting wasn't as spontaneous as the official story requires. The official answer is Maggie. The writers stand behind it. The DVD commentary treats it as settled. But the contest nobody won? The clues Burns called meaningless? The fully produced alternate ending? Homer's unexamined confession in season 18? The final shot of Maggie that could mean two completely different things depending on how you read it? All of it together suggests something the show will never say out loud. The greatest mystery in Simpsons history was not solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, those are two very different things. Number section 4. How is Mr. Burns still alive? Stay right where you are. Let the room settle around you. We're going to slow down even further for this one because the question of Mr. Burns' survival is one that the show answers gradually, across many years, in fragments that only make a complete picture when you put them all together. This is not a rhetorical question. Within the established continuity of The Simpsons, Charles Montgomery Burns is a medical impossibility. His age has been stated, implied, and lightly contradicted across dozens of episodes, but every version of the timeline places his birth somewhere in the late 19th century. He has referenced personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He has told stories about events from the early 1900s as first-hand experiences. He has described working relationships with historical figures who died before most of the show's audience was born. By the most conservative estimate, Burns is well over 100 years old. By a more generous reading of everything the show has depicted, he might be considerably older than that. And he doesn't just exist in some diminished, barely functional state. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation with strategic ruthlessness. He manipulates municipal politics. He orchestrates long-term schemes that require sustained cognitive effort, financial sophistication, and a working understanding of modern law and technology. His body is frail, yes. His physical strength is almost non-existent. A small breeze can knock him over, but his mind operates with precision that most people, at any age, never achieve. Burns may be the most strategically intelligent character in all of Springfield. The show addresses his survival most directly in the Springfield Files, the season 8 episode we've already discussed. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment. The show calls it a regimen, and it's so intensive that it causes his body to visibly glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without it, he dies. The margin for error is 0. Burns is not surviving through any natural biological process. He is being maintained through recurring medical intervention that must be administered on a precise schedule. His life is managed the way you manage a machine. Miss one treatment and the system fails. And the treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, the man whose facility has been releasing radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own biological functions. Burns isn't just profiting from radiation, he's powered by it. His body has been so altered by decades of proximity to nuclear material that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. It requires external radiation input the way a normal body requires food. The immune system detail is one of the show's most famous scenes, and it deserves to be read not just as a joke but as part of a larger explanation. Burns visits a doctor and receives the news that he has every disease known to medical science. Every single one. Simultaneously, the doctor explains that all of Burns's diseases are present in his body at the same time, but they exist in a state of perfect equilibrium. Each illness cancels out the others. The doctor calls it Three Stooges syndrome. All of them trying to get through the door at once, so none of them can get through. The conclusion is that Burns is functionally indestructible, despite being the sickest person in the country, because everything that should kill him is being blocked by everything else that should kill him. Played as a joke, accepted as a joke by most viewers. But if you apply the radiation theory, it becomes something stranger and more coherent. Burns's body isn't maintaining this disease equilibrium through any natural process. The weekly radiation treatments are managing it. The treatments don't cure his illnesses. They keep them in stasis. They maintain the gridlock, balancing every condition against every other, preventing any single illness from gaining momentum. It's not medicine in any conventional sense. It's nuclear maintenance. Burns's body is effectively a reactor, and his weekly appointments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods to prevent a meltdown. This reframes Smithers's role entirely. Smithers is understood by casual viewers as Burns's endlessly devoted personal assistant, a man whose loyalty borders on absurd. But under this reading, Smithers isn't just emotionally devoted. He's operationally essential. Smithers manages Burns's schedule. He ensures Burns makes every weekly appointment. He monitors Burns's physical condition with the kind of vigilance that would be unusual even in a medical setting. The show has established across many episodes that if Smithers were ever removed from his position, Burns would be helpless. Not emotionally, physically. Without Smithers managing the treatment schedule, Burns misses a dose. The equilibrium collapses. Every illness in his body surges forward simultaneously with nothing blocking any of them. Smithers doesn't stay because he loves Burns, or at least not only because of that. He stays because he understands, possibly better than anyone else alive, that his absence is a death sentence. Smithers is keeping Burns alive through logistical precision, and that knowledge is the actual foundation of their relationship. Beneath everything else, the show layers on top of it. Burns's connection to historical events adds another dimension. The show has depicted Burns referencing an enormous range of historical moments spanning well over a century. He knew Howard Hughes personally. He attended Yale. He served in some capacity during World War II, though the show is deliberately vague about what exactly he did during that period. At one point, it's revealed he has had in his possession a $1 trillion bill that the United States government printed during the war, which Burns stole and kept hidden for decades. He has referenced the Gilded Age not as history but as personal experience. His family wealth predates the Industrial Revolution. The Burns family, as the show depicts it, is one of the oldest, continuously powerful lineages in American history. Not just wealthy, but the kind of wealthy that shapes infrastructure and charges everyone else for access to it. The kind of wealthy that exists so far above normal legal accountability that the concept becomes theoretical rather than practical. Burns inherited this legacy and has been extending it for well over a century. The question the show never quite answers is whether he's unique, or whether the Burns family has always found ways to extend their hold on life beyond normal human limits. If the current Burns has been alive for over 100 years through artificial means, was that always the family's approach? Before nuclear radiation? Before modern medicine? Did previous generations employ different methods to maintain their grip on power across generations? The show doesn't say. But it does establish that the Burns dynasty has been in unbroken control of their fortune for longer than most American institutions have existed. That kind of continuity doesn't happen through normal succession. Burns's relationship with death itself is worth examining. He has come closer to dying than almost any other character in the show. He was shot by Maggie Simpson. He has been hospitalized many times across the series. He has collapsed, been attacked, been abandoned in the wilderness with no resources, been poisoned, been exposed to things that should have been immediately fatal. And every time he comes back. Not through the cartoon resilience that lets Homer walk away from explosions. Burns returns through infrastructure, through money, through the machinery of wealth that ensures there will always be someone standing by with the resources to patch him back together. Homer survives because the show needs him to. Burns survives because he spent a century engineering a system designed to ensure his survival, regardless of what happens to his physical form. Homer's immortality is passive, almost accidental. Burns's immortality is deliberate. Every dollar he's spent, every politician he's purchased, every medical professional he's retained, every facility he's built, all of it feeds back into the same central purpose. Keep the treatments coming. Keep the diseases balanced. Keep the reactor running. Keep Burns alive. The strangest part of this is the town's dependence on him. Springfield's economy runs on the power plant. The power plant runs on Burns. Burns runs on the treatments. The treatments run on the infrastructure that Burns's wealth sustains. It's a closed loop, a self-sustaining system where the man, the machine, and the money feed each other indefinitely. Springfield cannot destroy Burns because Springfield cannot survive without Burns. The town is structurally dependent on the person poisoning it. And Burns cannot die because dying would mean the system he built would finally have to answer for what it has done to the people who live inside it. He is the oldest man in Springfield. He might be the oldest man in America. He is kept alive by weekly radiation treatments, sustained by a fortune that predates the nation itself, protected by an assistant whose devotion is functionally a medical necessity, surrounded by a population too altered to question why their employer glows in the dark and remembers historical events as personal anecdotes. He is not immortal. He's something more unsettling than that. He's too expensive to die, and Springfield will keep paying the bill for as long as Burns keeps the lights on, which, if his treatment schedule holds, could be forever. Number Section 5. The Principal and the Pauper Springfield's Collective Denial. Let the night settle around you. We're going to talk now about the episode that everyone decided to hate for the wrong reasons, and what it actually reveals about the town we've been visiting all these years. Season 9, Episode 2. The Principal and the Pauper. The 28th of September 1997. The backlash when this episode aired was immediate and intense, and it has never fully faded. 28 years later, fans still cite it as a turning point, the moment the show betrayed its audience's trust, the episode that broke The Simpsons. But what if the fans have been reading the betrayal backwards? What if this episode didn't break The Simpsons? What if it revealed what The Simpsons had always been? Here's the story. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service. During the ceremony, a stranger walks in, a man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war and presumed dead. He survived, he escaped, and he came home to discover that someone else had been living his life. The man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a street kid from a rough background. No family, no stability, nothing in particular to hold on to. He was drafted into the army. He served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news of Skinner's death to his mother, Agnes. When he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never had a family or a home or an identity that felt like his own, just went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the life, the mother, and he lived inside that stolen identity for 20 years, until the real Skinner walked through the gymnasium door and the whole thing collapsed. Now here's where Springfield does something extraordinary. The town holds a meeting. Both men are present. The truth is fully exposed. Everyone in Springfield knows the man they've trusted as their principal, who has educated their children, managed their school, participated in their community for 2 decades, is not who he says he is. And the town does not vote on whether to prosecute Tamzarian. It does not vote on whether to restore the real Skinner's life and identity. It votes on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The verdict is unanimous. They choose to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree. The imposter is declared to be the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war hero, the man who survived a POW camp and came home to find his life stolen, is physically tied to a railroad car and removed from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever mention the truth again, under penalty of torture. A town, with full knowledge of a fraud, collectively decided that the truth was less valuable than their comfort. They had definitive proof. They had the actual person whose identity was stolen standing right in front of them. And they chose the fake. They sentenced the truth to exile and made it a crime to speak its name. Fans hated this. Harry Shearer, who voices Skinner among other characters, publicly stated his displeasure with the storyline. Critics argued that it destroyed Skinner's character by revealing everything we knew about him was built on fiction. The episode is consistently ranked among the worst the show has produced. It's called the moment The Simpsons stopped respecting its own continuity. But here's what nobody wants to say out loud. The episode is completely honest about what Springfield is. It just says the quiet part out loud. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. The town has always found ways to forget whatever doesn't fit the narrative. The only difference here is that the episode showed you the mechanism. It showed you the vote happening in real time. It showed you the legal decree. It showed you the literal expulsion of truth from the community. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, ignores a contradiction, or resets to normal after something world-altering occurs, it happens off-screen. The Principal and the Pauper is the one time the show let you watch it happen in the open. Consider how many times Springfield has experienced events that should have permanently changed the town's reality. The town has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. It has been invaded. It has been sealed under a government-ordered dome. It has survived near-nuclear disasters, environmental catastrophes, and the literal theft of its sunlight. Every single time, by the next episode, everything is back to normal. Nobody references the previous disaster. Nobody carries the trauma forward. The slate is wiped clean. The standard explanation for this is episodic storytelling. The coma theory calls it a dreaming brain resetting between cycles. The radiation theory suggests chronic neurological damage, compromises memory and critical thinking. But the Principal and the Pauper offers a fourth explanation, and it's perhaps the most unsettling of all. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset. Deliberately, collectively, through an unspoken social contract that says, we will not acknowledge what happened. We will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. We will treat the lie as truth, and the truth as criminal, and anyone who breaks this contract will be removed. This is not a cartoon trope. This is how real communities function. Small towns in particular have a remarkable capacity for collective denial. Scandals get buried. Uncomfortable truths get rewritten. Official versions become the only versions anyone remembers, not because everyone genuinely forgot, but because everyone agreed to act as if they did. The episode diagnosed Springfield. It identified the mechanism that makes every reset possible, the social contract that allows a town of mutated residents to pretend they're fine, and a man in a coma to pretend he's awake. The machinery of denial is not a passive thing in Springfield. It requires active maintenance. It requires votes and decrees and the occasional exile of anyone who insists on remembering too clearly. The chain of avoidance makes its own terrible logic. If Springfield remembered the dome, they'd have to acknowledge the pollution. If they acknowledged the pollution, they'd have to confront the plant. If they confronted the plant, they'd have to challenge Burns. If they challenged Burns, the economy collapses. If the economy collapses, the town dies. So they forget. They vote to forget. They make it illegal to remember. And anyone who remembers too much, who insists on truth when the community has chosen comfortable fiction, gets tied to a train. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary in the coal mine. He arrived with proof that the official narrative was a lie. The town's response was to criminalize the truth and exile the messenger. That's not a comedy beat. That's the show telling you exactly how Springfield maintains its impossible reality. Through consensus, through denial, through the systematic removal of anyone who threatens the agreed-upon version of events. And if the coma theory is true, this episode takes on a different shade entirely. If everything since Season 4 is Homer's dream, then Homer's unconscious mind invented a scenario where an entire town votes to sustain a lie. Because that's what Homer needs to believe. He needs to believe that lies can be maintained forever. He needs to believe that a stolen identity can become real through collective agreement. He needs to believe that the fake version of a life can replace the real one, and nobody will ever be able to call it out. Because that's what Homer's coma is. A fake life replacing the real one. A dream pretending to be wakefulness. And as long as Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to confront what's actually happening. Armin Tamzarian is still pretending to be Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. And the real Seymour Skinner is still out there somewhere, tied to a train, exiled from his own life. The last honest man in a town that made honesty illegal. Number, Section 6. Maggie Simpson, the most dangerous person in Springfield. Let your eyes close a little more now. We're going to talk about the quietest member of the Simpson family, and the possibility that she is the most powerful person in all of Springfield, and that she has been hiding that fact deliberately and brilliantly for 36 years. Maggie Simpson doesn't speak. She doesn't walk reliably. She communicates through pacifier sounds and the occasional pointed stare. She is, officially, 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 3.5 decades. In all that time, without saying a word, she has accomplished more than every other member of her family combined. She shot a billionaire. She led a rebellion among the infants at her daycare against a tyrannical caretaker, organized it, planned it, and carried it out to success. She has saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations. She has demonstrated problem-solving abilities that exceed those of adults with decades more experience. She was tested and found to possess a level of intelligence that cannot be accurately measured by standard instruments. And through every single one of these moments, every remarkable thing she has ever done, she has maintained her silence. She returns to her pacifier. She goes back to looking like a baby. She disappears back into the background of the family's chaos. Let's start with the shooting, because even though we've already discussed the mystery of who really fired the gun, the aftermath tells us something important about Maggie specifically. A baby was officially identified as the person who shot the richest man in Springfield. The evidence was examined, and the conclusion was, yes, this infant committed an act of violence against a grown man, and there is nothing anyone can do about it. And then the final shot of the episode. Everyone leaves the room. Maggie is alone. She looks around carefully, deliberately confirming that nobody is watching. Then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. That sequence requires specific analysis. That's not reflexive baby behavior. That's not a random mouth movement. That is a 1-year-old child demonstrating situational awareness. Knowing what she did, knowing that the gesture has significance, checking her surroundings before performing it in private. What Maggie does in that final shot requires a chain of cognition that infants do not possess. She understands that there are observers. She understands that the observers being absent changes what she can safely express. She understands that the action she's recreating carries, meaning that those observers, if present, would respond to. That's not a baby being a baby. That's a person managing information. The Longest Daycare is a theatrical short film released in 2012, shown before Ice Age Continental Drift in cinemas, and it was nominated for an Academy Award. It runs 7 minutes. In those 7 minutes, Maggie Simpson demonstrates intelligence that would be remarkable in an adult, deployed through the physical limitations of a 1-year-old body. The premise is simple. Maggie is dropped off at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare facility run with rigid, authoritarian efficiency. Inside, Maggie encounters a caterpillar about to form a chrysalis. She wants to protect it. A bully baby named Gerald wants to destroy it. What follows is a miniature action film in which Maggie outmaneuvers the bully, the facility staff, and the building's security systems, all without speaking a word, all without being able to walk reliably, all within the physical constraints of a 1-year-old body. She does it through observation. She reads the environment. She identifies threats. She develops strategies on the move. She executes multi-step plans that require timing, spatial reasoning, and the ability to anticipate other people's behavior. She falls. She stumbles. She crawls when she needs to run. But her decision-making is, in every moment the short depicts, correct. Her body cannot keep up with her mind. Her mind compensates for everything her body cannot do. She succeeds because her intelligence is operating at a level that her physical development simply cannot match. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly across multiple episodes. The results vary because the show doesn't want to commit to a single answer. But the pattern is consistent. Maggie consistently registers cognitive abilities that fall outside what any measuring instrument is designed to assess. The show plays this for a quick laugh, then moves on. But across all those quick laughs, across all those passing references, a picture takes shape. And then there's the silence. Maggie's defining characteristic is not her intelligence. It's the fact that she chooses not to demonstrate it. She has spoken. Once. Her first word was daddy, and it was voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in an extraordinary cameo. It happened once and was never repeated. Since then, 36 years of silence. She is surrounded by a family that produces more ambient verbal noise than almost any household in fiction. Homer narrates his own confusion. Marge expresses anxiety in an ongoing stream of worried speech. Bart provokes constantly. Lisa lectures at length. The Simpson house is never quiet. And in the center of it all, on the floor, or in her high chair, or being carried from room to room, Maggie watches and listens and processes and says nothing. The theory is that Maggie's silence is not developmental delay. It is a strategic decision made by a mind intelligent enough to understand the value of invisibility. Look at what happens to the intelligent women in the Simpson family. Lisa is brilliant. Genuinely, measurably, demonstrably brilliant. She has an IQ that dwarfs every other person in her household and most of the adults in Springfield. And what has that intelligence brought her? Isolation, dismissal. She speaks and gets ignored. She challenges authority and gets punished. She tries to improve her community and gets worn down by a town that doesn't want to be improved. Lisa's intelligence is the most visible thing about her, and the world around her has spent 8 years per episode showing her how little that visibility accomplishes. Maggie watched this happen. She has been watching it happen since the day she was born. She watched her sister fight every day for recognition and receive mostly resistance. She watched the smartest person in the family be consistently undervalued, overlooked, and exhausted by a household and a community that rewards compliance and punishes insight. And Maggie learned not the lesson Lisa learned, which is to keep fighting regardless of the cost. Maggie learned the opposite lesson. Silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less they notice you, the more you can accomplish. Think about it in terms of what Maggie has actually managed to do while being invisible. She shot the richest man in town and faced no consequences because nobody seriously investigates babies. She organized the daycare rebellion because nobody monitors infants closely enough to see them strategizing. Every heroic act, every display of genuine capability, every moment where Maggie actually saves the day happens below the radar, in the margins, in the spaces where nobody is looking. And Maggie has ensured nobody looks by maintaining the most effective disguise possible. She performs exactly what everyone expects a baby to be: quiet, passive, helpless, dependent. She is, in reality, none of those things. But as long as the performance holds, she moves freely. She watches everything. She acts when she chooses to act. And she is never caught. Now connect this to the radiation theory. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations that affect each person differently, then Maggie represents the extreme opposite end of the spectrum from Homer. Homer's mutation diminished his intelligence to a clinical disability. Maggie's mutation amplified hers to levels beyond measurement. Same family, same contaminated water and irradiated air. Where the father's brain was reduced, the daughter's was enhanced. Homer and Maggie are two sides of the same radioactive coin. He is what happens when mutation takes something away. She is what happens when mutation gives something extraordinary. And if the coma theory is true, Maggie's intelligence takes on a different emotional weight. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode is his unconscious mind trying to hold on to his family, then Maggie's genius is his deepest hope for his youngest child projected into the dream. He cannot watch her grow up. He cannot see what she becomes. He cannot hear her speak or see her walk or learn what kind of person she's going to be. So in the dream, he makes her extraordinary. He gives her an intelligence that exceeds everything. He makes her capable of things no baby should be able to do, because in his coma, he needs to believe that Maggie will be okay, that she will survive without him there, that she will be more than okay, that she will be magnificent. Her genius, under this reading, isn't a mutation, it's a father's prayer, the most hopeful thing a dreaming mind can offer to the child it loves and cannot reach. But back in Springfield, if there still is a waking Springfield, there's a darker reading available. Maggie doesn't speak because she has learned that speaking accomplishes nothing in this town. She doesn't reveal her intelligence because intelligence is penalized here. She watches everything, she remembers everything, she understands everything, and she waits. For what? The show has never told us. Maggie's endgame is the one truly unsolved mystery of the Simpson family, because the show has never committed to showing us what she's actually capable of when she decides to stop hiding it. We've seen glimpses. A shot, a rebellion, a butterfly saved from a bully by a mind operating inside a body that couldn't quite keep up. Moments where Maggie looked at something and understood it completely and chose deliberately whether or not to act. She is 1 year old. She cannot walk reliably. She cannot speak beyond a few sounds. And she is, by any coherent analysis of the evidence the show has given us, the most capable person on Evergreen Terrace. She just hasn't decided what to do about that yet. And that might be the most unsettling thing about Maggie Simpson. Not what she's done, what she's been patiently, quietly, invisibly waiting to do. Behind the pacifier. Behind the enormous eyes. Behind 36 years of careful, deliberate silence. Something is thinking. Something is planning. Something is watching the family and the town and the world with an intelligence that nobody suspects and nobody could contain. And when Maggie decides to act, Springfield won't see it coming, because that is exactly how she designed it. Number Section 7. The predictions, prophecy, or pattern. Let the quiet settle in around you. The television screen is a little dimmer now. We're going to talk about the thing that made The Simpsons famous in the 2020s in a way it hadn't been since its golden age. The predictions. The idea that a cartoon sitcom from 1989 has been accurately forecasting world events for over 30 years. And the truth behind this phenomenon is more interesting than any conspiracy theory that's been built around it. Let's get the major ones out of the way, because you've almost certainly seen them shared on social media. In the year 2000, a Simpsons episode depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson becomes the first female president of the United States. In that same episode, Lisa's predecessor in the Oval Office is referred to as Donald Trump, who left the presidency having bankrupted the country. This episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 election. 16 years. The internet went sideways. Screenshots flooded social media. The phrase The Simpsons predicted it became a cultural shorthand that transcended the show's fanbase and entered the mainstream. People who hadn't watched The Simpsons in decades were suddenly sharing clips and asking, how did they know? That's just the headline. The list is long and genuinely impressive when you read it without skepticism. A 1,995 episode depicted a device that functions remarkably like a modern smartwatch, in an era when the idea of wearing a computer on your wrist was science fiction. A 1,994 episode sent Homer to space with Buzz Aldrin, decades before commercial space tourism became a reality. A 1,998 episode featured Homer encountering a mathematical equation that appears to prefigure the predicted mass of the Higgs boson particle, which wasn't experimentally confirmed until 2012. A 1,999 episode had Homer propose that the universe might be shaped like a donut, and years later cosmologists identified radiation patterns suggesting the universe might actually have a toroidal topology. A 1,993 episode called Marge in Chains depicted a flu virus originating from Asia spreading to Springfield, causing mass panic, supply shortages, and a desperate search for a cure. This aired 27 years before COVID-19. During the fictional outbreak, the townspeople accidentally release a swarm of killer bees, which felt bizarrely resonant when Asian giant hornets, labeled murder hornets by the media, appeared in the United States during the 2020 pandemic. In 1996, a Simpsons episode featured a throwaway joke about hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra. In 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, 28 years between the joke and the reality. A 1,998 episode depicted Disney acquiring 20th Century Fox, which actually happened in 2019. Multiple episodes across different seasons depicted video calling, autocorrect failures, and pervasive surveillance technology years before these became daily features of ordinary life. The internet's response to each new apparent hit follows a consistent pattern: amazement, a little bit of unease, and the question, how are they doing this? Are the writers time travelers? Is there a conspiracy? Is The Simpsons some kind of encoded prophetic text dressed up as a cartoon? Al Jean, who has been an executive producer on the show for most of its run, addressed this directly. His answer was brief and entirely undramatic. He said that if you throw enough darts at a wall, some of them are going to hit the bullseye. That's it. The show has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of satirical observations about American culture, technology, politics, and society. When you generate that volume of content across that span of time, some portion of it is going to align with future events through statistical probability alone. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its strongest seasons, put it slightly differently. He said there are very few genuine cases of prediction in the show's history. Mostly it's coincidence, combined with the fact that history tends to rhyme with itself. The same kinds of events, the same kinds of cultural moments, tend to recur because human behavior moves in patterns. Fact-checking organizations that have examined specific claims have reached similar conclusions. Many of the supposed predictions turn out, on closer inspection, to be based on trends that were already clearly visible when the episodes were written. The writers didn't predict the Trump presidency. They observed that Trump had been publicly floating the idea of running for office since the late 1980s, and they wrote a joke about the logical extreme of celebrity politics becoming normalized. They didn't predict the Disney-Fox merger. They observed that media consolidation was an accelerating trend and wrote a gag about a mega corporation absorbing everything around it. They didn't predict the smartwatch. They observed that technology was getting smaller and more personal, and imagined what that trajectory led to. The writing staff of The Simpsons has historically been among the most educated in American television. Multiple writers have Ivy League degrees. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, computer science, and political theory. These aren't people generating random guesses. They are intelligent, well-read observers of American culture who spend their careers studying trends, analyzing systems, and extrapolating current trajectories to their logical conclusions. They're not predicting the future. They're reading the present more carefully than most people bother to, and then pushing it forward a few steps. This explains most of the apparent predictions, but not all of them. Because some of the coincidences are so specific, so precisely detailed, that statistical probability starts to feel insufficient. The Trump prediction didn't just forecast that a celebrity might seek political power. It specified Trump by name. The episode depicted him descending an escalator to make his announcement, which visually mirrors what Trump actually did when he announced his 2015 campaign. The Siegfried and Roy episode didn't just joke about the danger of exotic animals. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers, which is almost exactly what happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers. These aren't vague trend extrapolations. These are specific details. And this is where the most interesting reading of the prediction phenomenon emerges. Not from the conspiracy side, from the cultural side. The Simpsons doesn't predict the future. The Simpsons shapes it. Not through magic, not through prophecy, through the specific mechanism of cultural influence at scale. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most deeply embedded pieces of American media ever produced. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand their own culture. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people absorb it. It becomes a reference point. It becomes something people share and discuss and hold on to. The joke doesn't predict what's going to happen. It makes what's going to happen feel familiar when it arrives. It primes the cultural imagination. It makes certain ideas feel less like shocking impossibilities and more like obvious punchlines. When the punchline arrives, when reality catches up to the satire, it doesn't feel like prophecy. It feels like recognition. We've been here before. The Simpsons already covered this. The show didn't predict Disney buying Fox. The show made media consolidation feel inevitable by treating it as obvious satire. When the acquisition actually happened, the cultural response wasn't shock. It was a collective sigh of course they did. The show had already framed it as the natural endpoint of an existing trajectory. So when the endpoint arrived, people felt they'd seen it coming all along. Springfield doesn't reflect America. In some meaningful sense, America has been becoming Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years, and the audience stared into it so long that the reflection started to look familiar. The nuclear power plant, the corrupt billionaire, the incompetent government, the population too distracted and overwhelmed to see clearly how badly they're being exploited. The endless cycle of catastrophe and reset. The collective amnesia that allows the same mistakes to repeat. Springfield isn't a prediction of where America was heading. It's a diagnosis of where America already was when the show began. The writers just wrote it down first. And here's the piece of the prediction phenomenon that gets left out of nearly every discussion about it. The Simpsons has also made jokes that didn't come true. Thousands of them. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies and technologies that never materialized. Jokes about political outcomes that went the other way. Jokes about cultural shifts that never happened. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody shares them on social media. Nobody builds a theory around the predictions that missed. Confirmation bias works in one direction only. We remember the hits. We forget the misses. When you produce 800 episodes containing thousands of satirical observations and then filter the results so that only the accurate ones get remembered and circulated, you end up with a highlight reel that looks like prophecy. The misses have been quietly removed from the sample. What remains is the thing that makes the show look supernatural. The predictions aren't supernatural. They're the natural product of a brilliantly written show running for an impossibly long time, staffed by some of the most educated writers in television history, generating more satirical content than any other show ever made, and then having that content filtered through confirmation bias on the most powerful information-sharing platform ever built. The show wrote enough possible futures that some were bound to come true, and the ones that came true are the only ones anyone remembers. But try telling that to yourself the next time a clip from 1997 lines up perfectly with a headline from tomorrow. Because knowing how the trick works, understanding the mechanism completely, doesn't make it stop being impressive to watch. 800 episodes, 36 years, thousands of observations, and enough bullseyes to make even the show's own creators pause and wonder if maybe, just maybe, they know something they shouldn't. Number. Section 8. Mona Simpson and the Three-Generation Conspiracy. Let the sounds of the night settle around you. What we're about to discuss is one of the show's quietest and most devastating long-form storylines. The one that explains Homer Simpson more completely than anything else the show has offered. And the conspiracy at the center of it connects Burns, Homer's childhood, 3 generations of Simpsons, and the power plant in a way that stops feeling like satire and starts feeling like tragedy. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official story. Abe Simpson told his son that his mother had passed away when Homer was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned. He grew up believing he was a boy whose mother died, and whose father was too emotionally distant to fill the void she left. That belief shaped Homer's entire adult personality. His desperate need for approval, his terror of abandonment, his willingness to endure humiliation and degradation from Burns rather than risk losing the stability of his job and his family, his compulsive need to be liked, to be seen, to be recognized, his clinginess with Marge. Homer's personality is, at its foundation, a coping mechanism built around the experience of maternal loss. Everything about how he moves through the world traces back to a grief that began when he was very small. In Season 7, the show revealed the loss was a lie. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired the 19th of November, 1995. And it is, by most critical accounts, one of the greatest episodes in the show's entire run. Here is what happens. Homer, in typical fashion, fakes his own death to avoid having to work on a Saturday. He pushes a dummy off a cliff near the power plant and lets the town believe he's dead. When Marge insists he go to the Hall of Records to correct his official death certificate, Homer discovers something that stops him cold. According to municipal records, his mother is alive. She never died. The grave Abe showed him was not hers. It belonged to Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe had been pointing at a famous writer's headstone and telling his son it was his mother's for Homer's entire life. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She doesn't recognize him at first. He has grown, changed, become someone she couldn't have predicted. But when Homer proves who he is, they have a reunion that is one of the most genuinely affecting scenes the show has ever produced. A grown man and his mother, separated for 27 years, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. Mona tells him the truth. She didn't die. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because staying would have put Homer and Abe in danger. Because the man who owned the power plant, the man Homer would grow up to work for without ever knowing the connection, had destroyed her life and forced her into hiding. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife in Springfield. She was married to Abe. She had a young son named Homer. She was ordinary, living a quiet life while the world outside was burning through the civil rights movement, the counterculture, the growing protests against the Vietnam War. Something changed. Mona was radicalized. She joined a group of activists, and they targeted a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Hold that for a moment. Burns didn't just own a nuclear power plant. He owned a germ warfare facility, a laboratory producing biological weapons, operating in Springfield, in the same town where Homer was growing up and children were playing in parks and families were going about their lives. Burns was manufacturing weapons-grade pathogens in the community, the same community he would later saturate with nuclear contamination through his power plant. Mona and her group broke into the lab. They destroyed the biological agent stored inside. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who happened to be Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid was successful. The germs were destroyed. But Mona made one mistake on the way out. She stopped to help someone who had fallen in the chaos. The person she stopped to help was Mr. Burns. She paused long enough for him to see her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. And from that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not explain to her small son why she was going, could not hold him or tell him she loved him in a way he could carry forward. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared. For 27 years, Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead, and Homer spent the next 3 decades of his life believing he was the kind of son a mother would rather abandon than stay for. Believing, at some level too deep for words, that there was something fundamentally wrong with him that made people leave. Burns didn't just identify Mona to the FBI and move on. He held the grudge, actively, for decades. When Mona returns to Springfield in Season 7, Burns recognizes her almost immediately, through a cab window. He calls the authorities. The FBI comes to the Simpson house. Mona has to flee again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time. This time he knows why she left. He knows who forced her out. He knows that the man responsible is the person who signs his paychecks. And Homer does not connect the dots. He doesn't confront Burns. He doesn't quit. He doesn't process the connection between the billionaire who owns his building and the billionaire who stole his childhood. The show doesn't play this as a joke. It plays it as something much quieter and harder. Homer is too damaged, too cognitively affected by a lifetime in Springfield's environment, by the crayon, by the radiation, by 27 years of unexamined grief, to see the architecture of what was done to him. And that's the conspiracy. Burns didn't just ruin Mona's life, he engineered Homer's. By driving Mona away when Homer was very small, Burns ensured that Homer would grow up emotionally fractured, desperate for approval, incapable of challenging authority, afraid of abandonment above almost all other things. He would be, as an adult, the perfect employee. Someone who would work at a dangerous facility for decades without serious complaint, because the alternative, being alone, being abandoned again, being without the job that gives him structure, was worse than any working conditions. Homer doesn't work at the power plant because he lacks better options. Homer works at the power plant because Burns broke him as a child, and the broken version of Homer is precisely the version Burns needs: compliant, grateful for any scrap of recognition, unable to mount effective resistance. The show confirms this connection in another episode, where it's revealed that Burns and Grandpa Simpson once struck a deal. Burns had committed some transgression, and Abe discovered it. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed that Homer would have a job at the plant permanently, regardless of performance. No matter how many mistakes he made, no matter how many times he should have been fired. 742 documented errors, and Homer was never permanently dismissed. Homer's job security wasn't a cartoon convenience. It was a contractual obligation between his father and the man who destroyed his family. Brokered in silence, maintained in secret, and never explained to Homer, because explaining it would mean explaining everything else. The chain of damage runs through 3 generations. Mona fought against a billionaire's weapons program and lost everything. Abe made a deal with the enemy and buried the truth. Homer inherited the consequences and never understood why his life felt so heavy, why he carried so much unnamed grief, why something in him always felt like it was bracing for abandonment. 3 generations of Simpsons, broken by one man's grudge. And Homer stands at the center of it, too damaged to see the full picture, too dependent to break free, strangling his son every evening on the couch in a house that runs on electricity generated by the same plant that poisons his water, employed by the man who stole his childhood. Burns didn't just take Homer's mother, he took Homer's potential. The episode where the crayon is removed proves this. Without it, Homer is brilliant, articulate, capable of seeing his world with clarity. The man Homer could have been, the man he would have been if his mother had stayed and Burns had not intervened, that man exists inside Homer's skull, trapped behind a crayon and decades of environmental damage and unprocessed grief. Homer chose to put the crayon back because being intelligent in Springfield was unbearable. The clarity was too painful. But the choice was never really free. It was made by a person who had been systematically broken since childhood, who had been raised in a contaminated town working for the man who orchestrated the break, who had never been given access to the full picture of his own story. Homer was never meant to be smart in Springfield. Burns made sure of that when Homer was 6 years old, and his mother vanished in the night. Mona Simpson died in a later season. The scene is one of the show's most quietly devastating. Homer sits beside her, he holds her hand, and he watches the mother he barely knew slip away for the last time. No joke, no reset, just a man and his mother, and the weight of 27 stolen years between them. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. But underneath all of it, underneath 36 seasons of Homer falling down and getting back up, there is a story about a family that was systematically taken apart by one man's power and one town's inability to resist it. Mona fought and lost everything. Abe made a deal and buried the truth. Homer inherited the consequences and never understood why. And Burns won. Burns always wins, because in Springfield the man with the money writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson will work at the power plant for as long as the plant runs. Because his grandfather made a deal. Because his mother made a choice. Because the richest man in town needed a broken man in Sector 7G, and Homer was broken before he ever clocked in for his first shift. Number. Section 9. Where is Springfield? The geographic impossibility. The room is quieter now. Let yourself sink in a little more. We're going to look at a mystery that sounds simple and turns out to be anything but. Where is Springfield? Not just which state it's in. The deeper question. Why has a show spent 36 years making it impossible to answer that question? And what does the impossibility itself actually mean? Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people worldwide can identify Springfield by name than can name the capital of half the actual states in the country. It has a nuclear power plant, a tire fire that has been burning for years, a gorge, a harbor, a monorail, a prison, hospitals, an elementary school, a tavern, a quick mart, a baseball stadium. It also has mountains, and ocean access, and desert within driving distance, and farmland, and forests, and what appear to be active volcanoes nearby. It borders, depending on the episode, the states of Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky. It is located on the coast. It is also in the heartland. It is near the Canadian border. It is also close to Mexico. Its weather ranges from blizzard conditions to tropical heat waves within a single television season. Springfield does not exist in any one state because it exists in all of them simultaneously. The show has been contradicting itself about the town's location for its entire run. Every time a detail appears that seems to narrow the geography down, another detail appears in a different episode that rules out whatever the first detail suggested. In one episode, Springfield is definitively north. In another, it's south. Lisa's area code appears to be a Missouri code. The state abbreviation shown in one episode is NT, which isn't a real state abbreviation. When Homer once called the state capital, the recorded message identified the state as beginning with a vowel, which eliminates some possibilities while leaving dozens open. The show teases answers and then snatches them back, over and over, for 36 years. Matt Groening, the show's creator, addressed this once. In a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine, he named the inspiration. He said he chose the name Springfield because it's one of the most common city names in America and because he grew up near Springfield, Oregon. He wanted the town to feel like it could be anywhere. For approximately 48 hours after that interview, the mystery appeared to be solved. Springfield was in Oregon. Case closed. And then the show kept going. Episodes continued airing that placed Springfield in geographic contexts completely inconsistent with Oregon. The writers didn't honor Groening's confession. They kept building contradictions. They kept the mystery alive because the mystery, it gradually became clear, was never about geography. It was about something else. Springfield's geographic impossibility is the show's most sophisticated joke. The town has oceanfront property and mountain ranges and desert and active volcanoes all within driving distance, in a combination that no real American town could possess. It's an architectural Frankenstein, assembled from pieces of every American community that has ever existed. It has the industrial decay of the Rust Belt. It has the suburban sprawl of the Sun Belt. It has the small-town insularity of New England and the cultural blankness of the Midwest. It's everywhere and nowhere. It's the town you grew up in regardless of where you actually grew up. This is, at the surface level, the intentional design philosophy. Groening has confirmed it. The show was meant to resonate with the broadest possible American audience by being set in a place that could be any of their places. Springfield is universal. Springfield is every town. But under the lens of the theories we've been sitting with tonight, Springfield's geographic impossibility takes on a different quality. If the radiation theory is true, if Springfield is a contamination zone where the laws of biology have been warped, why should geography be exempt? If the people of Springfield can have 4 fingers and yellow skin and survive injuries that should be fatal, why should the physical landscape around them follow normal rules? Maybe Springfield has both mountains and oceans, because the contamination doesn't only affect biology. Maybe the radiation has done something to the space itself around Springfield, compressing geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible region. If the coma theory is true, Springfield's impossible geography makes even more intuitive sense. Homer's dreaming brain doesn't have a precise map of America. It has impressions. It has fragments of every place Homer has ever visited or seen on television or passed through. Mountains from one vacation, ocean from a commercial, desert from a movie he watched as a kid, farmland from driving through the Midwest. A dreaming mind assembles its setting from every piece of the world it ever touched, layering them together without regard for geographic logic. Because dreams don't have geographic logic, dreams have emotional logic. And Springfield feels like America because it's made from Homer's memory of America, which is scattered and incomplete and held together by longing rather than cartography. If the collective denial theory from The Principal and the Pauper is true, Springfield's refusal to have a fixed location serves a practical function. You cannot investigate a town you cannot find. You cannot bring federal charges against a nuclear power plant if the state it's located in keeps changing. You cannot hold anyone accountable if the jurisdiction is perpetually undefined. Springfield's geographic uncertainty is not just a comedy device. It's a legal shield. A town with no fixed location has no consistent regulatory authority, no permanent state environmental oversight, no attorney general with clear jurisdiction over its nuclear facility. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means accountability. Landing means someone shows up with a map and a badge and starts asking questions about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the billionaire who has memories spanning more than a century. In the episode Behind the Laughter, the show's 12th season mockumentary, Springfield's location was finally given definitively, Northern Kentucky, or so it seemed. In syndicated reruns, that detail was changed to a different state. The answer literally depends on which version of the episode you're watching. The show gave you the truth and then changed the truth depending on the platform and the broadcast. Even when Springfield has a definitive answer, that answer isn't definitive. It mutates. It refuses to stay fixed. Like everything else in this town, every state in the country has been theorized as Springfield's home at some point. Every theory has evidence in its favor and evidence against it. The show has maintained this state of permanent geographic ambiguity for longer than most of its viewers have been alive. Springfield will never be located. Not because the show can't decide, because the show decided long ago that Springfield is more valuable as a mystery than as an answer. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. And a town that belongs to everyone is a town nobody can shut down, nobody can fully investigate, and nobody can make answer for what it has done to the people who live inside it. Number. Section 10. The floating timeline. Why no one ages. It's very late now. Or very early. Somewhere on the long, quiet side of night. And we're going to sit with the final central mystery, the one that ties every other theory together, the one that sits at the center of everything we've discussed tonight, like a question that the show has been circling for 36 years without ever landing on. Why doesn't anyone age in Springfield? Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons debuted in December 1989. He is 10 years old right now. Lisa was 8 then, she is 8 now. Maggie was 1 year old, she remains 1. Homer and Marge were somewhere in their mid-30s. They still are. 36 years have passed in the world where the audience lives. 0 years have passed in Springfield. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. The show's present is always the viewer's present. When an episode aired in 1995, the characters were living in 1995. When an episode airs in 2025, they're living in 2025. The year changes, the technology changes, the cultural references change, but the characters stay frozen at the ages they were when the show began. This is the standard approach for long-running animated shows. The Flintstones did it, the Jetsons did it. It's accepted as a production convention, and most viewers move past it without much thought. But The Simpsons has been running long enough, and with enough internal detail, that the floating timeline has created contradictions so significant that they've started to destabilize the foundation of the show's reality. The clearest example is Homer and Marge's backstory. When the show began, their history was grounded in the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school. They fell in love to the music of that era, in the fashion of that era, against the backdrop of the cultural events of that era. Their courtship was anchored to a specific time period that made sense for people in their mid-30s in the late 1980s. But as the floating timeline dragged the present forward, the backstory had to move with it. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they didn't meet in 1978. They met around 2005, which means their formative years weren't defined by Watergate and disco. They were defined by MySpace and early YouTube and the particular anxieties of the early 2000s. The show has actually depicted this shift explicitly. In later flashback episodes, Homer and Marge's youth has been progressively rewritten. They were grunge-era kids. Then they were early internet-era kids. Then they were early 2010s kids. Each revision maintained the emotional core of the story, the love that developed between them, while replacing the specific cultural context with whatever matched the current timeline. Their origin story has been told and retold at least 4 times, each version set in a different decade. Homer and Marge don't have a fixed past. Their history is a draft that gets revised every few years to maintain the illusion of a permanent present. Their memories are unstable. Their origin story is approximate. And the show treats this as normal, because within the logic of a floating timeline, it has to be. Now apply the theories. Every single theory we've discussed tonight converges on this point. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man. The radiation theory says nobody ages because their mutated biology has been altered at a level that affects normal cellular processes. The principle and the Popper theory says nobody ages because Springfield collectively agrees to ignore any truth that threatens the status quo, including the passage of time itself. The Burns immortality theory says at least one person in Springfield has already found a way to circumvent normal aging through technology and wealth, which means the concept of aging is already negotiable in this universe. All of these different theories, using different evidence and different logic, arrive at the same conclusion. Time doesn't work in Springfield. Something, whether it's the radiation or the coma or the collective denial or the billionaire's medical technology or some combination of all of them, has broken the normal flow of time for everyone inside the town's limits. The floating timeline isn't a production convenience, it's a symptom. It's the show telling you that these characters are trapped, locked in a cycle, endlessly repeating variations of the same lives without progressing, without growing, without reaching the conclusion that time should eventually deliver to every living thing. The show has imagined its characters aging, multiple times. Season 6 has the episode Lisa's Wedding, which flashes forward to show Lisa as a 23-year-old woman engaged and working in London, living the life the show has always implied she's heading toward. The future the episode depicts is rich and detailed and emotionally specific. Lisa has grown up into the person the show has spent years suggesting she'd become: intelligent, principled, searching for connection. The episode proves the show can imagine these characters with futures. It can tell those stories. It has the tools. But it always pulls back. The flash forward is a single episode, a glimpse through a window that immediately closes again. Lisa returns to 8, Bart returns to 10. The future is sealed off. The permanent present resumes. The show can imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. This is where the mystery becomes something larger than the Simpsons themselves. The floating timeline isn't just a narrative device. It's a statement about the audience's relationship to this family and what they represent. The Simpsons is the American family. They have been the American family for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. They are the lens through which American culture has examined itself for 36 years. And the American family, as the show depicts it, cannot be allowed to change. Homer must always be middle-aged. Marge must always be patient. Bart must always be rebellious. Lisa must always be idealistic. Maggie must always be silent. The dynamic must hold, Because the moment The Simpsons ages, the moment Bart goes to college and Lisa moves away and Maggie starts talking and Homer retires and Marge is left alone in that house on Evergreen Terrace, the show isn't a comedy anymore, it's an elegy. It's the story of a family that ran out of time. And the audience doesn't want that story. The audience wants the version where the kids are always young and the parents are always together and the house always looks the same and the couch gag always plays and nobody ever has to say goodbye. The floating timeline is the show's thesis statement. The Simpsons are frozen in time because we need them to be. Because they represent something we can't let go of. The messy, chaotic, dysfunctional, loving, infuriating, indestructible American family. The family that survives everything. That recovers from everything. That resets after every disaster and starts fresh every Sunday night at 8 o'clock. The characters don't age because aging means ending. And the American family, in our imagination, in the collective dream we share with this show, is not allowed to end. The loop isn't their prison. It's ours. We built it, we maintain it, we tune in every week to make sure the walls are still standing and the family is still there and the timeline is still floating. And every time we watch, every time we laugh, every time we quote a line from an episode that aired before most of us were born, we tighten the loop a little more. We make it a little harder for the Simpsons to escape. Because if they escape, if the timeline stops floating and starts landing, if Bart turns 11 and Lisa turns 9 and Maggie finally says her second word, then the show ends. And the show ending means admitting something true about time and about ourselves. That the years have passed, that we're older, that the world has changed, that the couch we sat on as children while the opening credits played is gone, or in someone else's house, or doesn't exist anymore. As long as The Simpsons is on, as long as the loop keeps floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is stumbling through the door after another day at the plant, we don't have to admit any of that. Time stopped in Springfield because we stopped it. We pressed pause in 1989, and we never pressed play. And here we are 36 years later, watching the same family in the same house, on the same street, in the same impossible town, waiting for something to change, knowing nothing will. Because we won't let it. Number Section 11. Hans Molleman's Death Count and Ned Flanders' Dark Secret. The night is very quiet now. We're going to visit 2 more corners of Springfield before we bring everything together. 2 characters who have been hiding something in plain sight for decades in very different ways. The first is Hans Moleman. If you've watched The Simpsons for any amount of time, you know Hans Moleman. Tiny, elderly-looking, nearly blind. He wears thick glasses and moves slowly, and exists primarily at the edges of scenes, in the backgrounds, in the margins of whatever else is happening. He has been a recurring presence for almost the show's entire run. He also dies. Constantly. In canonical episodes. He gets struck by cars. He gets crushed by objects. He gets buried alive. He gets eaten by animals. He gets struck by lightning. He gets incinerated. He gets flattened by equipment. By conservative estimate, Hans Moleman has been killed on screen more times than any other character in the history of American animation. Not in Halloween episodes, not in dream sequences, in regular, continuity-respecting episodes of the show, and then he appears in the next episode completely fine. No explanation, no resurrection scene, no acknowledgement that he was dead 2 episodes ago. He simply shows up again, ready for whatever the next scene requires of him. Most fans accept this as a running gag. Moleman dies a lot. It's funny. Don't examine it too closely. But under the framework of the theories we've been building tonight, Moleman's repeated deaths are genuinely strange. The radiation theory has an interpretation for this. If Springfield's contaminated environment produces mutations that affect each person differently, Moleman could represent the most extreme biological alteration in the entire town. A man whose cellular structure has been so fundamentally changed by nuclear exposure that his body can reconstitute itself after fatal trauma. He doesn't survive damage the way Homer survives damage. Homer endures things that should kill him and keeps going. Moleman actually dies. His body ceases to function. And then it starts again. Death in Springfield, under this reading, might be a temporary condition for certain residents. A biological reset that the plant's contamination has made possible in the most damaged members of the population. The coma theory offers a different reading. Moleman, in Homer's dream, is a background process, a minor character that Homer's unconscious mind doesn't maintain with the same consistency it applies to the central family. He dies because Homer's dreaming brain occasionally lets peripheral figures lapse, loses track of them, and then regenerates them when the dream requires a body to populate a scene. Molman isn't a person in this reading. He's a piece of furniture that Homer's mind breaks and reassembles as needed. The collective denial theory from the principal and the pauper offers a third explanation. Springfield has simply agreed not to notice. A man dies in public repeatedly, visibly, in front of witnesses, and nobody investigates. Nobody calls for a coroner. Nobody asks how he keeps coming back. The town has normalized Molman's death cycle the same way it has normalized everything else that should alarm someone. The three-eyed fish, the glowing billionaire, the baby who shot a man, the principal who isn't who he says he is. There's one more Molman detail worth holding on to. He once stated, on camera, that he is 31 years old. 31. He appears to be somewhere in his 80s or 90s. If he's telling the truth about his age, and there's no in-universe reason to assume he's lying, then something has aged him catastrophically, decades beyond his actual years. Something took a young man and turned him into what the show presents as an ancient, fragile figure in an impossibly short span of time. Something that also made him nearly impossible to kill permanently. The youth erased, the death cycle activated. If you needed an extreme test case for what the radiation theory predicts exposure might eventually do to a person, Hans Mollemann is what it looks like. Now we turn to Ned Flanders. And this one requires more care, because Ned is the character the show has been quietly devastating for 36 years without ever quite acknowledging how dark the truth about him actually is. On the surface, Ned is everything Homer is not. He's kind, he's patient, he's genuinely devout, he's physically fit, he's financially responsible, he's a good father, a good neighbor, a good member of his community. He is, by any objective measure, a better person than Homer in almost every conceivable way. And the show punishes him for it relentlessly. Ned's wife Maude was killed by a freak accident at the Springfield Speedway. A t-shirt cannon misfired. Homer was dodging the shirts. They hit Maude instead. She fell from the bleachers. She died. Homer's selfishness, his reflexive self-preservation at others' expense, literally killed his neighbor's wife, and Ned forgave him. Because that's what Ned does. He forgives. He turns the other cheek. He absorbs punishment after punishment and responds with grace and patience and an unwavering statement of faith that God has a plan. But there's a scene in Season 8, in an episode called Hurricane Nettie, where the show pulls back the curtain. A hurricane destroys Ned's house. The community rallies to rebuild it, an act of genuine Springfield warmth that is undercut when the rebuilt house, constructed by neighbors who meant well but had no idea what they were doing, collapses the moment Ned walks through the door. Ned snaps. He has a complete psychological breakdown. He screams at the town. He insults people who have never heard him express anything other than cheerful goodwill. He says things he has been holding inside for a very long time. And then he is admitted to a mental health facility, where the episode reveals something that reframes everything we've ever seen Ned do. Ned's relentless niceness is not a natural character trait. It is the result of childhood behavioral modification. As a child, Ned was violent and uncontrollable. His parents, being free-spirited individuals who didn't believe in discipline, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him. What the episode describes is essentially behavioral reprogramming. The doctor suppressed the rage. He replaced it with compliance. He built a cage around the feral child using years of intensive therapy. Ned's kindness isn't who he is. It's who he was made. Everything about Ned reads differently once you have this information. His patience with Homer isn't saintly. It's pathological. His brain was wired to suppress anger at all costs. So when Homer does something that would make any normal person furious, Ned's programmed response suppresses the fury before it can fully form. His faith isn't spiritual conviction. It's a framework he was given to explain why good behavior goes unrewarded. His forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death wasn't grace. It was the programmed response of a man who was conditioned as a child to never allow himself to feel the anger that lives underneath. When the conditioning fails, in Hurricane Nettie, the person underneath is not cheerful or patient. The despair that emerges is bottomless. Ned Flanders has spent his entire life performing goodness because the alternative, the person he actually is without the behavioral cage, is someone he was told was unacceptable before he was old enough to decide for himself. The darkest observation about Ned is one the show never states directly, but that emerges from the accumulated weight of his storylines. God talks to Homer regularly. In Season 4, Homer has a direct, face-to-face conversation with God. God gives him advice. God seems genuinely interested in Homer's situation. Later episodes return to this dynamic. Homer has a relationship with the divine that the show treats as real within its universe. And Ned, who goes to church every Sunday, who has dedicated his entire life to faith, who has built his identity around the belief that goodness is seen and rewarded, Ned has never had that conversation. Not once. God speaks to Homer and ignores Ned. The man who barely shows up to church gets divine attention. The man who has given his life to devotion gets silence. That's not random. That's the show making a statement. The Simpsons is telling you that goodness is not rewarded in Springfield, that kindness is not protected, that faith is not answered, that the system, whether it's Burns' empire or the radiation or the floating timeline, does not respond to moral behavior. It responds to something else entirely, something closer to compliance and survivability than to virtue. And Ned is the most compliant man in Springfield. He was programmed to be compliant before he was old enough to choose. His reward is a dead wife, a destroyed house, a neighbor who will never appreciate him, and a God who speaks to everyone except the one person who has been listening his whole life. Ned Flanders is what happens when you do everything correctly in a system that doesn't reward doing things correctly. Homer Simpson is what happens when you do everything incorrectly in a system that doesn't punish it. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. The gap between them, the gap between the man who tries and the man who doesn't, has never closed. Because the system isn't designed to close it. The system is designed to keep Homer at the power plant, and Ned at the church, and Burns at the top, and Mulman cycling through the ground and everyone exactly where they are, forever, in a loop that doesn't break. That's Springfield. That's what every mystery and every theory we've explored tonight reduces to, when you push it all the way back to its foundation. A town where nothing changes, where nobody grows, where time doesn't pass and consequences don't stick. Where the same family sits on the same couch, in the same house, every single week, watching the same television, living the same life, in a loop that started in 1989 and has no scheduled ending. Number section 12. Everything connected the final theory. It's very late now, or very early, the kind of hour when the world gets genuinely quiet. And we've spent a long time in Springfield tonight. We've walked its streets and visited its buildings and sat with its residents and examined all the things the show has been hiding in plain sight for 36 years. Let's bring everything together, because the theories we've explored tonight aren't separate explanations. They're different angles on the same shape. They're all pointing at the same thing, each from a slightly different direction. The radiation theory says Springfield is a contamination zone. Its residents have been biologically altered by decades of nuclear exposure from a facility operated by a man who understood exactly what he was doing. The mutations are visible in the residents' physical appearance, their extraordinary resilience, their compromised cognitive function, their inability to question their own circumstances. The fish have 3 eyes, and nobody asks what that means for the people drinking the same water. The coma theory says Springfield is a dream. Everything since April 1993 has been generated by the unconscious mind of a man lying in a hospital bed, holding onto his family the only way he can, by dreaming them exactly as they were at the moment he lost them. The show's escalating strangeness, its frozen ages, its endless resets, all of it is the product of a brain that loves its family too much to stop running the simulation. The principal and the pauper theory says Springfield is a community that has organized itself around denial. The residents don't fail to notice what's wrong. They choose not to notice, collectively, through an ongoing social contract that makes it practically illegal to insist on uncomfortable truths. The resets aren't organic forgetting. They're deliberate erasure. The Burns immortality theory says Springfield is a closed system engineered for one man's survival. Everything in the town, the economy, the employment structure, the legal system, the medical establishment, serves the function of keeping Burns alive and in control. The residents are not citizens. They're components of a machine built around one ancient man's need to keep the treatments coming. And the Mona Simpson theory says the brokenness of Springfield is not accidental. It was designed by one man's grudge, by one deal made in secret, by the systematic destruction of a family that produced the one person Burns needed most. an incompetent safety inspector with no ability to resist, no memory of why he should, and no one left to fight on his behalf. Every one of these theories arrives at the same destination. Something is fundamentally, structurally wrong in Springfield. Something that goes deeper than the jokes and the callbacks and the 36 years of accumulated continuity errors. Something that the show has been encoding into its DNA since the very first episode, not through dramatic reveals, but through accumulation, through patience, through the slow layering of detail upon detail upon detail until the picture becomes impossible to dismiss. The Simpsons isn't hiding its mysteries, it's showing them to you every single week. It just relies on the fact that nobody in Springfield can see them clearly enough to do anything. And nobody in the audience can see them clearly because we've been watching long enough to become Springfield ourselves. We've accepted the yellow skin and the four fingers, and the ageless children, and the billionaire who won't die, and the town that refuses to change. We've normalized it all. We've become the people who look at a three-eyed fish and say, well, that's just how things are around here. But they don't have to be. The theories exist because some people looked at Springfield and refused to accept the surface. They dug. They connected. They asked the questions the characters couldn't ask, because the characters are caught inside the loop. And what they found was a version of Springfield that is stranger and sadder and more beautiful than the one the show presents at face value. A version where Homer's stupidity is a scar left by a system that broke his family before he was old enough to know it was happening. Where Maggie's silence is the most intelligent thing anyone in the household has ever done. Where Burns's survival is the logical endpoint of unchecked wealth, carried forward across a century through sheer force of infrastructure. Where Marge's patience is the thing holding the entire fragile structure together, the only force in Springfield that doesn't break. Where Bart's rebellion is the only sane response available to someone growing up in a world that has stopped making sense. And where Lisa, 8 years old and brilliant and frequently alone, keeps asking questions nobody wants to answer. Because she's the only person in Springfield who hasn't stopped looking. Who hasn't made the deal with herself that says the three-eyed fish is just how things are? Who refuses to normalize the abnormal? Who keeps pointing at the cracked cooling towers and asking what they're leaking? Who won't stop noticing even when noticing is exhausting and pointless and gets her nowhere? Lisa Simpson is Springfield's conscience. She cannot fix the town. She probably cannot even change it, but she will not stop seeing it clearly. And in a place where collective denial is the survival strategy, that refusal to stop seeing is the bravest thing anyone does. That's The Simpsons. 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes, the longest-running animated series in American history, the most analyzed and theorized show ever made. And after all of it, after all the evidence and all the theories and all the hours spent looking at what's really underneath the yellow surface, the biggest mystery is still the simplest one. Why can't we let them go? Maybe it's because they're us. Maybe Springfield is our town. Maybe Homer is our father, and Marge is our mother, and Bart is who we wanted to be, and Lisa is who we suspected we should have been, and Maggie is the version of ourselves we keep hidden behind a pacifier or a careful face or a deliberate performance of something smaller than we are. Watching everything, saying nothing, waiting for the right moment to finally speak. Or maybe it's even simpler than that. Maybe we can't let them go because letting them go means admitting that 36 years have passed, that we're older, that the world has changed in ways we didn't fully authorize, that the couch we sat on as children while the opening credits played is gone, or in someone else's living room, or in a landfill somewhere, and we're not the person who sat on it anymore. As long as The Simpsons is on, as long as the loop keeps floating, as long as Bart is 10, and Lisa is 8, and Homer is stumbling through the door at the end of another day at the plant, we don't have to admit any of that. We can turn on the television. We can go home to Evergreen Terrace, to Springfield, to the family that never changes, in the town that never ages, in the show that never ends. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the whole point. Not the radiation or the coma or the denial or the conspiracy. Just the simple, persistent warmth of a family that has been there, on the same couch, in the same house, for longer than anything else on television. Still there. Still together. Still home. The loop isn't a prison. The loop is a promise. Come back next Sunday, and the family will be exactly where you left them. In a yellow house, on a street called Evergreen Terrace, in a town that doesn't appear on any map, but that every one of us somehow knows by heart. Number extended section. The secondary mysteries, What the main theories don't explain. Let the quiet settle in again. We covered the major theories. But Springfield is a town that keeps generating questions, and there are corners of the show that the big theories don't fully illuminate. We're going to walk through some of those now. Slowly. In no particular hurry. Let's begin with Barney Gumble, because Barney is one of the show's quiet tragedies, and most people haven't fully sat with what the show has actually done with him. Barney and Homer were best friends in high school. This is established in a flashback episode. They were close in the way teenagers are close, the specific bond of two people figuring out who they are at the same time in the same place. Barney was, by all indications in the flashback, a bright and decent person. He had potential. He was headed somewhere. And then Homer gave him a beer. The flashback makes this explicit. Before Homer gave Barney that first beer, Barney did not drink. The person Springfield knows as the town drunk, the person who has lived at Moe's Tavern for what appears to be decades, the person who communicates primarily through belching and barely holds himself together in any given social situation, that person was created by one action, one moment, one beer, offered casually by a friend. The Barney that Springfield knows is the result of Homer's thoughtlessness, and Homer has never fully reckoned with this. Barney has been Barney, the drunk, for so long that the show barely remembers he used to be someone else. In one later episode, Barney sobers up. He becomes clean. He starts to reclaim himself. He shows the town what he might have been. And the show doesn't quite know what to do with him, so it sends him back to drinking. Because Barney sober doesn't fit Springfield. Because Springfield has a use for Barney drunk, and no particular place for Barney in recovery. Homer is responsible for what Barney became. Burns is responsible for what Homer became. The damage cascades through the town in connected streams. Then there's Sideshow Bob. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. is one of the show's most beloved recurring characters. The cultured, brilliant, operatically theatrical villain who has spent 30 years trying to kill Bart Simpson. He was Sideshow Bob, the sidekick on Krusty the Clown's show, before he framed Krusty for robbery and briefly took over. Bart exposed him. Bob went to prison. And from prison, from every subsequent incarceration, from every failed attempt at a normal life, Bob has maintained his singular obsession with the destruction of the 10-year-old boy who ruined him. The show plays this mostly as elaborate comedy. Bob's plans are theatrical. His failures are operatic. When he finally, in one episode, actually manages to kill Bart, the show immediately resets because a time loop is involved, and it turns out killing Bart just means you have to watch him die over and over forever. But the actual psychology of the Sideshow Bob situation, if you strip away the comedy, is genuinely disturbing. A deeply intelligent, deeply educated man has had his entire life redirected by a 10-year-old's correct identification of his guilt. Everything Bob has become, every crime he has committed since, every year he has spent in prison or plotting, all of it flows from the moment Bart caught him. Bob's life after that moment is entirely defined by his relationship to a child who is now 36 years old, but who, in Springfield, has never aged past 10. Bob has given his life to vengeance against a child who will always be 10. He will never reach an older Bart. He will never settle the score in any way that time eventually makes irrelevant. The object of his obsession is frozen at the age at which he wronged Bob forever. And Bob, by contrast, has aged. He has suffered. He has experienced consequences. He is caught in a particular kind of hell where the person he wants to reach is frozen beyond his grasp. The floating timeline is particularly cruel to Sideshow Bob. Now let's talk about Krusty the Clown. Because Krusty is a character the show has used to make observations about show business and fame and the collapse of the performer's self. And most of those observations are quite dark. Krusty, whose real name is Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yaruchim Kristofsky, is a children's entertainer who has spent his entire adult life not particularly enjoying what he does. He drinks, he gambles, he chain smokes. He has made and lost fortunes. He has been married and divorced multiple times. He has a daughter he barely knows and a father, a rabbi, whose approval he spent decades pursuing. His comedy is performative in the most mechanical sense. He puts on the makeup and does the show, and then takes off the makeup and becomes a completely different person, a sad and tired person, a person who has spent so many years being Krusty that he's not entirely sure who he is when the wig comes off. Krusty is a celebrity, and the show uses him to talk about what celebrity does to a person over the long term. What happens when you spend your entire life performing for an audience and never quite figure out how to be something other than the performance? Krusty knows his show is low quality. He's been phoning it in for years. He doesn't particularly love the children who watch him, though he isn't cruel to them. He's just been in the business too long to feel anything strongly about it anymore. In one episode, he briefly retires, and the episode shows that Krusty without Krusty is barely functional. He doesn't know what to do with himself. He doesn't have interests outside the performance. He doesn't have an identity that exists independently of the clown. The show is the thing keeping him going, not because he loves it, but because he has nothing else. Springfield is full of people like this. People who are what they do, who have been what they do for so long that they've forgotten there was ever anything else. Burns is his empire. Wiggum is his badge. Ned is his faith. Krusty is the show. The town gives people roles and the roles become total. Principal Skinner, or Armin Tamzarian, is the most extreme version of this. A man who stepped into a role out of a complicated mix of guilt and need and longing, and then inhabited it so completely, for so long, that by the time the original role holder returned, the fake had become more real than the real. The town voted to keep him, because a person who has been something for 20 years is, in some meaningful sense, that thing. The identity may have been stolen, but the decades of living inside it were genuine. Speaking of Skinner, the relationship between Skinner and his mother, Agnes, is one of the show's longest-running and most uncomfortable through-lines. Agnes is a character written with real psychological complexity beneath the broad comedy. She's controlling, critical, emotionally demanding, and deeply invested in keeping her son dependent on her. Whether Skinner is the real Skinner or Armin Tamzarian, Agnes needed him to be her son. She needed someone to fill that role so badly that she accepted a stranger's performance of it, and she spent 20 years maintaining the control over the person she decided to call her son. Skinner, meanwhile, is a Vietnam veteran, or is performing as one, who has been reduced by his relationship with his mother to something almost childlike. He still lives with her. He still asks her permission for things. He flinches at the sound of her voice even when it's not angry. He has built a professional identity as the authority figure of an elementary school, the person, children, and even some adults defer to, and he goes home every evening to a dynamic that completely inverts that authority. The show plays this as a comedy. It is also, if you hold it in the light for a moment, a portrait of how a controlling relationship can contain an adult indefinitely, preventing them from ever quite becoming the full person they might otherwise have been. Now let's visit Comic Book Guy. Jeffrey Albertson, otherwise known entirely to Springfield as Comic Book Guy, is the owner of the Android's Dungeon and Baseball Card Shop. He is brilliant in a narrow way. He has encyclopedic knowledge of comics, science fiction, genre television, and adjacent cultural artifacts. He is also deeply unpleasant, dismissive, and has spent so many years cataloging and ranking things that he's forgotten how to simply experience them. The show has occasionally given Comic Book Guy moments of genuine vulnerability. He has fallen in love. He has faced health crises. He has been forced to confront the gap between the life he has and the life he might have wanted. But the show always pulls back. He returns to his default setting, which is contempt deployed in the direction of everything around him. Comic Book Guy is a character about what happens when expertise curdles. When knowing a lot about something stops being in service of loving it and becomes instead a mechanism for establishing superiority, he is Springfield's most enthusiastic gatekeeper. His shop is his domain. His opinions are his identity. And he has defended both with such consistency for so long that the defense has become the whole of him. The show uses him to poke fun at a certain kind of fan culture, at the impulse to rank and exclude and declare things the worst episode ever as a reflexive response to things not meeting your expectations. But it also, underneath the satire, shows you someone lonely. Someone who has found a territory he can control in a world that largely hasn't given him much control, and who holds that territory with an intensity that would be exhausting if it weren't so committed. Every character in Springfield, if you look at them long enough, reveals a version of this. They've all found their territory, their role, the thing they're defined by. And they guard it with everything they have because in Springfield, if you lose the role, it's not clear what's left. Now let's consider something that doesn't get much attention in theories about the show. The question of Springfield's media ecosystem. The town has a newspaper, the Springfield Shopper, that has been in operation for most of the show's run. It has a local television station, Channel 6, which has employed various personalities across the decades. It has a local radio station. It has Kent Brockman, the news anchor who has delivered Springfield's news through every disaster and scandal and impossible event the town has experienced. Kent Brockman is interesting precisely because he's been present for so much of what should be the town's most alarming history and has reported on all of it without apparent cumulative effect. He covered the three-eyed fish story. He covered Burns blocking out the sun. He covered the dome. He has witnessed professionally more evidence of Springfield's dysfunction than almost any other character. And his response to each new catastrophe is to report on it with the particular detached professionalism of someone who has learned to treat any story as just a story. There's one episode where Brockman, mid-broadcast, learns that ants are apparently on their way to take over the world, and he immediately, cheerfully, declares his allegiance to the new ant overlords. It's a famous joke, but it also reveals something about Brockman. He has no particular loyalty to the audience he's serving. He adapts to power. He goes wherever the authority is. Under the collective denial theory, Brockman is not a journalist in any meaningful sense. He's a narrator of the official version. Whatever Springfield has decided is true, Kent Brockman reports it. The three-eyed fish? Mentioned, then forgotten. The dome? Reported, then moved past. Burns's illegal activities? Covered when they become unavoidable, then set aside when they become inconvenient. Brockman is the town's memory management system. The show puts stories through him and then lets him move on, and the audience moves on with him, because that's how media works. We remember what gets repeated. What gets mentioned once and then dropped disappears into the background. Brockman's job is partly to make sure certain things only get mentioned once. And then there's Otto. Otto Mann, the school bus driver, is one of Springfield's gentler background characters. He drives the children to school every day, apparently quite contentedly, while existing in a state of almost complete indifference to the conventional markers of adult success. He has no stable housing at various points in the series. He is enthusiastic about music and unconcerned about everything else. The children like him. He likes the children. The bus usually gets where it needs to go. Otto is Springfield's character of pure affect. He's happy. Genuinely, apparently happy, not in the desperate way that Ned's happiness is manufactured, but in the way of someone who has decided that certain things matter and other things don't, and who has arranged their life accordingly. The show doesn't examine Otto too deeply, because examining him too deeply would either reveal that his happiness is built on something unsustainable, or that it's actually genuine. And both of those discoveries would complicate what Otto is supposed to be, which is uncomplicated. Springfield needs its Ottos. Every community does. The people who exist in the margins of ambition, who are not climbing toward anything in particular, who show up every day and do the thing they're there to do and then go home and feel okay about it. The show treats Otto with affection. He's not a target for satire in the way Burns or Wiggum or even Krusty are. He's just there, driving the bus, enjoying his music, living in Springfield in a way that appears, from the outside, to involve minimal suffering. Maybe that's the theory about Otto. He found the only livable version of Springfield by not wanting anything from it that Springfield couldn't provide. Let's go back briefly to Moe. Moe Sislak is, by any reasonable assessment, one of the saddest characters in a show full of sad characters. He runs a tavern that is technically a public establishment, but functions more as a private grief support group for its regular customers. He is chronically, almost definitively, unloved. He falls for women who don't return his feelings. He has been rejected so many times, in so many ways, that rejection has become his baseline state, the water he swims in. The show has used Moe for dark comedy many times. There's a running gag involving prank calls from Bart that Moe falls for every time. There are multiple episodes that go to very dark places with Moe's despair. The show is not shy about the fact that Moe is a profoundly unhappy person, but there are also moments where Moe is something else. When he briefly becomes a successful fancy bartender and transforms his establishment into an upscale venue, and then just as quickly loses it all. When he falls for women who see through the surface of him to something worth seeing. When he acts with genuine decency in ways that surprise everyone, including sometimes himself. Moe has a moral center that he keeps well hidden beneath his surface presentation. And the tragedy of Moe is not that he's a bad person. It's that the circumstances of his life have never given that moral center a fair chance to express itself. He's been ground down by decades of disappointment in a town that doesn't particularly reward decency. He keeps showing up, he keeps tending the bar, he keeps serving Homer and Lenny and Carl their beers, and he keeps going home alone. Moe is what Ned Flanders might have become without the behavioral modification, what Homer might have become without Marge, what Springfield produces when it removes the support structures and leaves someone to navigate the town's particular cruelties on their own. And Lenny and Carl. They deserve a mention. These two have been Homer's friends since the beginning of the show. They work at the plant, they drink at Moe's. They exist in a middle distance of the show's world, present in almost every major gathering but rarely the focus of anything. The show has given them each characteristics across the years: Lenny's ongoing bad luck with his eye, Carl's occasional revelation of hidden depths, but they mostly function as Homer's context. They're who he exists among. The show has hinted, gently and inconsistently, at the possibility that Lenny and Carl's friendship might be something more than friendship. These hints have never been developed. The show raises the idea and then moves on. But Lenny and Carl have been together in some form for the entire run of the show. Whatever their relationship actually is, it has been more stable, more constant, more genuinely present than most of the romantic relationships in Springfield. They show up for each other. They're there. In a town where almost everything resets, Lenny and Carl's steadiness is one of the few things that holds. There's something worth saying about Springfield's women beyond Marge and Lisa and Mona. The show has, across its run, periodically allowed female characters beyond the central family to exist with complexity, and then periodically failed to maintain that complexity. Luann Van Houten, Kirk's ex-wife and Milhouse's mother, is a character who got more interesting every time the show remembered to make her interesting. Helen Lovejoy, the Reverend's wife, who exists primarily to say, "Won't somebody please think of the children," and clutch her pearls, is a satire of a certain kind of moral performance, the person who cares visibly and loudly about propriety and almost not at all about the actual people in front of her. Brandine Spuckler, Cletus's wife, who the show treats as rural poverty shorthand in ways that haven't aged particularly well. The women in Springfield's margins reveal a lot about the town's assumptions: who gets to be complex and who gets to be a punchline, who gets backstory, and who gets one defining characteristic. The show has done better with this in some seasons than others. The fact that Marge's frustration and complexity have always been present, but rarely allowed to truly drive the narrative, is itself a comment on the position of women in the Springfield social structure. These are the threads that don't get pulled on very often. Not because they're less interesting than the major theories, but because they lead to places that feel more ordinary and therefore more true. The damage in Springfield isn't only coming from the nuclear plant or the coma or the collective denial. Some of it is just the ordinary damage that communities do to the people in them when those communities are built around hierarchies and assumptions and the comfortable fiction that everything is basically fine. Springfield is a very funny place. It's also a very broken one. And the break, when you look at it long enough, has a recognizable shape. The shape of a place that needed someone to blame for its problems and chose to blame the wrong things or nothing at all. The shape of a community that had enough love in it to be better than it was, but not quite enough courage to close the gap. Homer loves his family desperately, imperfectly, in ways that don't always look like love from the outside but that run all the way down. Marge holds the whole impossible household together with a patience that the show has never quite let us fully appreciate. Bart fights everything because fighting is the only tool he has that gets any response. Lisa sees everything and despairs about most of it and keeps seeing anyway. And Maggie watches, quietly, with those enormous eyes, behind that pacifier taking it all in, waiting for the right moment. Springfield will still be there when you wake up. It always is. That's the whole point. Number. Final extended section. The show within the show, what The Simpsons knows about itself? One more thing before we close the lights entirely. The Simpsons is a show that has spent 36 years being extraordinarily self-aware. It knows what it is. It knows what it does. It's broken the fourth wall more times than any other drama or comedy on television, not by accident, but deliberately, as part of its own ongoing project of self-examination. In the first episode, the show introduced itself as a cartoon. In the 20th season, it was still introducing itself as a cartoon. Except by that point, the cartoon had been running longer than most of its characters' real-world counterparts and had accumulated enough self-awareness to comment on that fact regularly. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, the annual Halloween specials, exist partly as a release valve. The show can do things in those episodes that it can't do in regular continuity because the specials are explicitly labeled as non-canonical. Characters can die. The town can be destroyed in genuinely catastrophic ways. The format can be bent to accommodate stories that the regular show's logic wouldn't allow. The specials are Springfield without the social contract. Springfield without the collective agreement to maintain the official version. What happens in the Treehouse of Horror is what Springfield might actually look like if it stopped pretending. And sometimes the Treehouse episodes are more honest about the town than the regular canon. The one where Homer's shadow detaches and lives its own life. The one where Springfield is invaded by aliens who discover they can maintain their control by running for political office because nobody checks. The one where the advertising mascots come to life and destroy the town because nobody can resist them once they're in motion. These are not just horror comedy spoofs. They're Springfield's own subconscious processing what the regular show can't quite say directly. The show's relationship to its own history is complicated. It began as a show with a clear internal continuity, a commitment to the idea that events had consequences and that the characters existed in a world where things accumulated. And then it became something else, something more fluid, something that could revisit and revise and reinterpret its own past as needed. Critics have different opinions about when this transition happened and whether it was a good or bad development. The coma theory, as we've discussed, offers one explanation. Other critics simply point to creative decisions made by different showrunners across different seasons. The floating timeline, the reset button, the willingness to contradict established continuity when it served a story's immediate needs, these became features of the show rather than bugs in the system. But there's a different way to read the show's relationship to its own history. The Simpsons has always been a show about memory, about how families maintain their shared stories, about how communities construct their collective narratives, about the gap between what happened and what gets told about what happened. Every flashback episode, every episode that revisits the characters' pasts, is an episode about the unreliability of memory, about the way stories get simplified and adjusted and improved in the retelling until the original event is barely visible beneath the accumulated version. Homer's memory of his childhood is shaped by grief and absence. Marge's memory of her courtship with Homer is shaped by the way the relationship turned out. Bart and Lisa's memories of their childhoods are being formed right now, in real time, by the events the show depicts, and the show has never quite let us think too hard about what kind of memories those are accumulating into. What does it mean to grow up in Springfield? What does a childhood in a contaminated town with a frequently absent or checked-out father, with a community that operates through collective denial, actually do to a person over time? The show's flash-forward episodes try to answer this. Lisa's wedding shows us one possible version. Various Treehouse of Horror futures show us others. The answers are never comfortable. The futures Springfield produces for its children are complicated, partial, marked by the town they came from in ways the characters can't always see clearly. The show has been telling its own story, obliquely, for 36 years. The story of a family trying to hold together in a place that makes holding together difficult. The story of a man who loves his family more than he's capable of expressing, whose love often looks like failure from the outside but runs deeper than most of what gets called love. The story of a woman who could have been many things and chose this specific imperfect family, this specific difficult life, and who chooses it again every episode implicitly by being there. The story of children growing up in a world that is asking them to become something before they fully understand what they are. Bart, the rebel without a clear cause, channeling enormous energy in directions that often work against his own interests because he hasn't found a better channel. Lisa, the idealist, confronting again and again the gap between the world as it is and the world as it should be, and refusing to stop being bothered by that gap. And Maggie, watching all of it, storing all of it, saying nothing. The theories we've explored tonight are not the show's official interpretations of itself. They're what happens when people love something enough to look at it very carefully and ask what it's actually doing when nobody's watching. When the jokes are stripped away and the callbacks are set aside, and the 36 years of accumulated material is examined for the patterns underneath. What those people found was a show that had been encoding a portrait of America in every episode. Not the America of political speeches or national myths, but the America of daily life. Of jobs you didn't choose working for bosses who don't see you. Of neighborhoods where the damage is visible if you look, but invisible if you agree not to. of families where love is real and present and imperfect and never quite sufficient for everything it's being asked to carry. Springfield is a diagnosis, the residents are symptoms, and the nuclear power plant on the edge of town, leaking its invisible damage into everything, powering the lights that everyone needs, owned by a man too old and too powerful to be challenged, is the system. The one that makes Springfield what it is. The one that has been making it what it is since before any of the current residents were born. The one that will still be making it what it is long after all of them are gone, because the system was never about the people. The people are incidental. The system is what matters. The system endures. And Homer goes to work every morning, gets in the car, drives to the plant, presses the same buttons, falls asleep at the same console, goes home, eats dinner with his family, watches television, goes to bed, and in the morning, he does it again, and again, and again, for 36 years, in a town that doesn't appear on any map, where nobody ages, where the fish have 3 eyes, where the principal isn't who he says he is, where the baby is smarter than everyone, where the billionaire will outlive everyone, where the most honest man gets expelled and the most loyal man enables the most damage, and the most brilliant child is the loneliest person in the room. That's Springfield. That's the show. That's what we keep coming back to, Sunday night after Sunday night, season after season, for 36 years. Maybe because it's honest. Maybe because it's true, in the way that only things that aren't real can be true. Maybe because it shows us ourselves with a clarity that real life doesn't usually allow. Maybe because Homer, despite everything, despite the radiation and the coma and the crayon and Burns's conspiracy and his own staggering limitations, still loves his family, still wants to be there, still comes home. Every episode. No matter what happened in the previous one. No matter what got destroyed or forgotten or reset. Homer comes home. And the family is there. And for 30 minutes, in a yellow house on a street called Evergreen Terrace, in a town that could be anywhere, everything is okay. It always is. Number. Deep dive expansion. The full mythology of Burns. Let the night carry you a little further. We talked about Burns at a high level, but the story of Charles Montgomery Burns goes so much deeper than the immortality question. Burns is the show's central villain, and the show has spent 36 years building a portrait of him that is, if you step back and look at the full canvas, one of the most elaborate character studies in the history of American television. Burns was born in 1886, or thereabouts. The show is deliberately imprecise about the exact date, but multiple episodes have placed his birth in the late 19th century, and the life experiences he references as personal memories form a timeline consistent with a man now well over 100 years old. He attended Yale University. He came from old money, the kind of generational wealth that predates the systems that modern people use to measure wealth, that was established before those measuring systems existed and has been sustained through them all. His childhood, the few glimpses the show has provided, was not warm. He had a teddy bear named Bobo that he loved, and losing Bobo was one of the earliest deprivations of his life. The bear ended up frozen in an Arctic ice floe for decades, eventually made its way through several improbable hands, and was finally reunited with Burns in an episode that showed a side of him the show rarely allows to surface, the small boy who never quite stopped wanting his toy back. Burns, holding Bobo at the end of that episode, is the clearest look the show ever gives you at what might have been inside him before the decades of wealth and power and ruthlessness covered it over. He served in World War II, or claims to have. His role during the war, based on the limited information the show has provided, was not heroic in any conventional sense. At one point, it's established that Burns worked with or for groups whose activities during the war were morally compromised. The trillion-dollar bill that Burns stole from the government during wartime and kept hidden for decades is the clearest evidence that his relationship to patriotism, to shared sacrifice, to the idea that wealth and power carry obligations, has always been transactional. He sees the world as a series of resources to be acquired and used. Nations, communities, laws, other people, all of these are inputs to a calculation, never ends in themselves. The relationship between Burns and Smithers has been one of the show's longest-running and most discussed dynamics. Waylon Smithers Jr. has served Burns with a devotion that the show has always presented as excessive, and the show has been fairly explicit, especially in later seasons, about the nature of Smithers's feelings for his employer. Smithers is in love with Burns. This is not subtext. The show has addressed it directly, gently, repeatedly. What the show has been less explicit about, but what emerges from the pattern of their interactions across many episodes, is the question of whether Burns has any genuine awareness of or response to Smithers' devotion. Burns uses Smithers. He relies on him absolutely. He would be unable to function without him. He treats him, in turn, with the casual dismissal of someone who has never seriously considered that the person serving them is a person with inner life. When Smithers briefly leaves, Burns doesn't experience something that looks like grief for a loved person. He experiences dysfunction, because a critical system has been removed. Smithers is infrastructure. Burns relates to him the way he relates to the power plant, as a resource that keeps him operational. And yet, across the show's run, there have been moments where something more seems to flicker in Burns. He has, occasionally, shown what might be affection. Not warm or generous affection, but the particular cold approximation of it that a man of Burns's formation might be capable of. He has, in rare moments, demonstrated that Smithers's presence means something to him beyond utility. Whether this rises to genuine care is the question the show has never quite answered. And under the radiation theory, there's an interesting dimension to add. Burns's emotional range may have been affected by the same extended proximity to nuclear material that has preserved his body and sharpened his mind while distorting everything around him. His capacity for warmth may have been among the first things the treatments adjusted out of him. The system that keeps him alive keeps him operational. Operational and warm are different things. Smithers grew up knowing Burns. His father, also named Smithers, worked for Burns and died, at some point in the show's history, in a nuclear accident at the plant. Burns was present. The younger Smithers, as a child, encountered Burns in the aftermath of his father's death. And rather than this creating in Smithers an appropriate horror, the story of the younger Smithers becoming devoted to Burns despite, or because of, what happened to his father, is one of the show's darkest psychological threads. The son of a man killed by Burns's negligence becomes the person most essential to Burns's survival. There is something circular about this that the show never completely unpacks. Smithers serves the man who destroyed his family, not because he doesn't know, but apparently, despite knowing. The devotion runs deeper than the damage. Or the devotion is a response to the damage, a way of making sense of it, of reframing the loss into something that can be lived with. Burns himself, across the many years the show has depicted him, has been shown to have had a relationship with human connection early in his life that the accumulation of wealth and age has progressively stripped away. There was a woman once, the show has depicted this, a relationship that meant something to him before he became fully the man Springfield knows. What happened to that relationship, what happened to whatever capacity for genuine care he once possessed, is another of the show's buried questions. The more you look at Burns, the more he becomes not just a cartoon villain, but a study in what extended power does to a person. What it means to spend more than a century as the most powerful person in the room. What that does to your relationship with other people, with accountability, with the basic human experience of being dependent on others and therefore vulnerable to them. Burns is not vulnerable. He engineered his way out of vulnerability decades ago. The treatments manage the physical fragility. The money manages everything else. The legal and political infrastructure he has built over a century insulates him from consequence. He has removed, one by one, every situation in which he would have to depend on another person's goodwill or mercy. Except Smithers, that dependency remains. And it is perhaps the most human thing about Burns, the one thread connecting him to ordinary vulnerability, that there is still one person without whom he cannot function. One person he cannot replace with money or infrastructure. One person whose presence is not just useful but necessary. Burns would never acknowledge this, but it is there, in every episode where Smithers saves him from his own incompetence. In every moment where Burns, who has survived everything, who has cheated death with engineering and wealth, simply would not have survived without the person standing immediately behind him. Now let's extend our understanding of the power plant itself, because there are layers to what the show has shown us about that facility that we haven't fully examined. The plant was not the first thing Burns built in Springfield. The biological weapons laboratory that Mona Simpson's group destroyed in 1969 predates the nuclear plant. Burns was operating dangerous industrial facilities in Springfield before the plant existed, which means the contamination of Springfield, if the radiation theory is correct, has a longer history than the nuclear narrative suggests. The biological weapons work was happening first. What happened to the materials and infrastructure of that lab after Mona's group destroyed its contents? The show doesn't say, but Burns didn't leave Springfield. He continued operating there. He built the nuclear plant on the existing foundation of his Springfield presence. The location of the plant matters in the radiation theory. It sits near enough to Springfield's water supply that the three-eyed fish downstream is the show's direct evidence. It's close enough to residential areas that the show has depicted the cooling towers as visible from multiple residential streets. It's positioned essentially at the center of Springfield's infrastructure, which makes sense as a power supply facility but becomes sinister when you factor in what it appears to be releasing. The cracked cooling towers have been shown multiple times. The chewing gum patch is real within the show's continuity. The violations are documented. The inspections have happened and found catastrophic failures. And after each inspection, after each finding, after each moment where the evidence becomes impossible to dismiss, Springfield has reset. The story has moved on. The violations remain. Under the collective denial theory, this is the social contract at work. The town cannot challenge the plant because the town cannot survive without the plant. So the town doesn't look. The safety inspector keeps his eyes closed at his workstation. The regulators accept whatever Burns's lawyers tell them. The residents drink the water and watch the three-eyed fish on the news and then change the channel. But what about the workers? Beyond Homer, the plant employs a significant portion of Springfield's working population. Lenny and Carl work there. Various other named characters have been shown to be plant employees at one time or another. What does it mean to work inside that facility, daily, for years? The show has occasionally gestured toward this. Characters who work at the plant display the same distortions as the rest of Springfield's population. Lenny's ongoing eye problems could be read as a specific symptom. Carl's particular calm in the face of ongoing chaos could be a long-term adaptation. But the show has never really pursued this line, never committed to showing the plant's effects on its workforce in a sustained way, because doing so would require the show to actually reckon with what it's depicting. The plant is the engine of the story. It cannot be destroyed, fixed, or fully examined without the story ending. So it remains. Cracked towers and all, running, leaking, providing the electricity that keeps Evergreen Terrace lit, keeping Homer employed, keeping Burns operational, keeping the loop going. There is one more Burns story that deserves attention, because it connects the immortality question to the question of legacy. Burns does not have children. He has had relationships, or approximations of them, across his long life. But there is no heir. No child waiting to inherit the empire. No family structure into which the Burns dynasty's continuation is embedded. This is unusual for the kind of dynastic wealth Burns represents. Old money typically replicates itself through family, through children trained from birth to manage and extend the legacy, through marriages that consolidate power, through the slow, patient work of building a family structure capable of sustaining wealth across generations. Burns has none of this. There is no next Burns. And the question of what happens to the empire when Burns finally dies, when even the treatments can no longer sustain the equilibrium, is one the show has never addressed. What happens to the power plant? What happens to the wealth? What happens to the closed loop that sustains Springfield? The town cannot survive without the plant. The plant cannot function without Burns. Burns cannot survive without the treatments. The treatments require the infrastructure that Burns's wealth provides. When the loop breaks, everything breaks together. Springfield's survival and Burns's survival are the same question, which means Burns's immortality, his indefinite extension of life through engineering and wealth, is not just his personal project. It is Springfield's project. The town benefits from his continued existence even as it suffers from his operations. A town that needs the man poisoning it to stay alive. A population that cannot challenge the person doing them the most harm. The loop is not just a metaphor. It's the actual structure of the relationship between Springfield and Burns. And it will sustain itself for as long as Burns can sustain the treatments, which, the show suggests, could be a very long time. Number, deep dive expansion, Lisa Simpson, and the weight of seeing clearly. Let yourself settle in further. The night is deep and quiet, and we have more Springfield to visit. We've talked about Lisa mostly in relation to Maggie, using her as the contrast that explains Maggie's silence. But Lisa deserves to be examined fully on her own terms, because she is one of the show's most complex creations and one of its most consistently underappreciated ones. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years. In that time, she has been Springfield's conscience, its moral compass, its internal critic. She is the character who sees most clearly what is wrong, and who is most consistently unable to do anything about it. She is, in that sense, the show's most tragic figure. Lisa is brilliant. This is established from the earliest episodes and maintained consistently. Her intelligence is not just academic, though she excels academically. It's moral and perceptual. She notices things. She connects things. She understands the implications of what she's seeing in ways that none of the other characters quite manage. When the three-eyed fish was pulled from the river, Lisa was one of the people asking the obvious question, what does this mean for the humans downstream? When Burns blocked out the sun, Lisa understood immediately what it meant for the ecosystem. When the town adopted a position the show wanted to satirize, Lisa was the character voicing the criticism clearly. She is, essentially, the character through whom the show says what it actually means. The jokes go through Homer. The satire goes through Burns or Wiggum or Kent Brockman. But the moral argument, the genuine claim the show is making about what's wrong with this world it has created, goes through Lisa. And Lisa is 8 years old. She is a child. And the adults around her, including her parents, including the teachers who should be nurturing her intelligence, including the community that should be grateful for the clarity she provides, consistently fail to take her seriously. Because she is a child. Because she is the weird kid. Because she plays the saxophone, which nobody in Springfield particularly likes. Because she keeps raising problems that are inconvenient. The show has been honest about the cost of this. Lisa's intelligence is her most defining characteristic, and it has made her fundamentally lonely. She is the smartest person in almost every room she enters. Not the most powerful, not the most effective, just the clearest seeing. And in Springfield, where clear seeing is actively discouraged by the social contract, being the clearest seeing person is a form of isolation. She has found community occasionally, a mentor here, a fellow child intellectual there, moments where she encountered someone who could meet her at her level, and she could simply exist without having to compress or translate or wait for everyone else to catch up. But those moments are temporary. Springfield always pulls back. The town cannot sustain the conditions for Lisa to thrive. It is not built for her. The flash-forward episodes show us where this leads. Adult Lisa, in Lisa's Wedding, is someone who has built a life outside Springfield. She's studying in England. She's engaged to a man who matches her. She's working toward the kind of future her intelligence pointed toward. But she still has to come home. She still has to navigate the gap between who she is and what Springfield expects. She still has to manage the disappointment of Homer's limitations and the particular pain of loving a father who loves her deeply but cannot quite understand her. The episode ends with Lisa and Homer at a fair, and the scene is one of the show's most genuinely moving. Adult Lisa, who has spent most of the episode slightly mortified by her father, realizing at the last moment that she loves him. That for all his limitations, all his failures to understand her, there is something real between them. Something that doesn't require understanding to be genuine. Homer loves Lisa, imperfectly and inadequately, and in ways that often look like failure from the outside. But he loves her, and Lisa, who has spent so many years wanting to be understood by someone her father can't quite be, settles for a moment into what's actually there. Lisa's relationship with Homer is the emotional center of the show, more than Homer and Marge's marriage, more than Homer and Bart's antagonistic bond. It's the relationship that most directly addresses the gap between what we want from the people who love us and what they can actually give. Homer cannot give Lisa what she needs intellectually. He cannot be the father who understands her genius or nurtures her curiosity or engages with her arguments. He can only love her, and the show keeps asking whether that's enough. And the show, episode by episode, keeps suggesting that it is not quite enough and also that it is the most important thing. Lisa's relationship with religion is worth discussing. She converts to Buddhism in a later season, and the conversion is handled with more care than these things usually receive in a network sitcom. She finds in Buddhism something she hasn't been able to find in the Springfield version of Christianity that Ned Flanders practices. A framework that doesn't require her to stop asking questions, that in fact encourages the asking of questions. that treats intellectual engagement as part of the spiritual practice rather than in tension with it. The conversion episode also shows you something about Springfield's relationship to difference. The town is not actively cruel to Lisa about her conversion mostly, but it is bewildered. And the bewilderment has a particular texture to it. The texture of a community that has its own way of doing things and is not quite sure what to do with someone who quietly steps outside that way without drama or confrontation. Lisa's vegetarianism is an earlier version of the same dynamic. She stops eating meat in season 7, and the show treats this with some nuance. Homer's initial response is dismissive and then actively obstructive. Marge tries to accommodate. The town mostly doesn't understand. Lisa maintains her position against social pressure and parental bewilderment, and ultimately finds a kind of peace with it, but the peace involves accepting that her choices will always be slightly out of step with the world she inhabits. This is Lisa's condition in Springfield. Her choices, her values, her intellectual and moral commitments are always slightly out of step. She cannot be fully herself in this town without being in friction with it. She adapts, she accommodates, she compresses herself into the space available. But the friction never entirely resolves. The gap between Lisa and Springfield doesn't close. It's one of the show's most consistent and most honest observations about what it means to be a certain kind of person in a certain kind of place. Under the coma theory, Lisa's brightness in Homer's dream is particularly affecting. If Homer is dreaming, then Lisa's intelligence is his deepest admiration projected onto his daughter. He sees or senses that she is exceptional. He cannot fully understand or articulate what makes her exceptional. But in the dream, he gives her the exceptionalism without the limitation. He makes her brilliant in ways that exceed his comprehension because that is how much he believes in her. And the loneliness he gives her is honest too. Because even in the dream, Homer knows that brilliance of Lisa's kind finds the world a difficult fit. He has watched her struggle. He has felt, even through his limitations, the particular sadness of being someone who sees the world clearly in a place that prefers the comfortable version. He gives her the brilliance because she deserves it. He gives her the loneliness because the dream, for all its wish fulfillment, cannot lie about the cost. Number, deep dive expansion, Springfield's economy and the infrastructure of control. We're still here. The night is long and Springfield has more to show us. There's a dimension of the town's life that the major theories gesture toward but don't fully examine: the economic structure of Springfield and how it maintains the conditions that make all the other strangeness possible. Springfield has a functioning economy. People have jobs. Money changes hands. Goods and services are exchanged. On the surface, it looks like any American small to mid-sized city, economically speaking. There's a manufacturing sector centered on the power plant. There's a retail sector with the Quickie Mart and various other shops. There's a service sector. There's local government, a police department, a school system, courts. But the more closely you look at Springfield's economy, the more clearly you can see that it is organized around a single point of control: the power plant, which means around Burns. The plant employs a significant portion of Springfield's working population directly. Beyond direct employment, the plant's payroll circulates through the local economy. The workers spend money at Moe's and the Quickie Mart and Springfield Elementary's fundraisers and everywhere else. The ripple effects of the plant's payroll touch almost every economic actor in town. Remove the plant and you remove the foundation on which the local economy rests. This is not an unusual situation for a company town. American history is full of communities that were built around single employers. Coal companies, textile mills, steel plants. The dynamics Burns exploits are not unique to Springfield. They're the dynamics of any place where one entity has become so central to the local economy that challenging it risks the survival of everyone who depends on that economy. What makes Springfield's version of this particular is the longevity. A typical company town eventually diversifies as the single employer ages, declines, or departs, and the community either adapts or dies. Springfield has been in this relationship with Burns for decades, across the show's run, without any movement toward diversification. The plant remains central, Burns remains in control. The dependency remains total. And Burns, who understands economies and power the way he understands his own medical treatments, has structured the relationship to maintain maximum dependency. He doesn't pay workers enough for genuine economic independence. He doesn't encourage the development of alternative employers that might compete for labor. He maintains a monopoly not just on Springfield's power supply, but on its economic stability. Any significant challenge to Burns's position in Springfield threatens not just the plant but everyone who depends on the plant, directly or indirectly. This is why the shooting mystery has such a particular resonance. Even with every possible motive, even with weapons available, even with the immediate cause of blocking the sun staring everyone in the face, Springfield's population could not sustain a real challenge to Burns. The mob gathered. The anger was genuine. And then someone took a single impulsive shot in a parking lot, and the moment passed. Because destroying Burns, truly removing him from the equation, would have consequences for every person in that mob that none of them were prepared to absorb. The economic dependency explains a lot of Springfield's political culture too. The town has an elected government, a mayor, a city council, various other elected officials. These institutions exist and appear to function. But whenever Burns wants something from those institutions, he generally gets it. Not because the officials are uniformly corrupt in the simple sense, though some of them are, but because they exist in the same economic relationship to Burns as everyone else. Challenging him has costs. Supporting him, or simply not obstructing him, does not. Mayor Quimby is the show's embodiment of this. He is corrupt in the cheerful, obvious way that cartoon politicians are corrupt. Taking bribes, nepotism, avoiding accountability, living well at public expense. But beneath the comedy, Quimby's corruption is structurally enabled by exactly the conditions Burns has created. Quimby has power in Springfield as long as he doesn't challenge the foundations of power in Springfield. He has learned to work within the structure rather than question it. The structure rewards him for this. He has a comfortable life, a secure position, access to resources most Springfield residents don't have. In exchange, he ensures that the mechanisms of democratic accountability don't threaten the arrangement that keeps Springfield economically stable. Environmental violations stay unaddressed. Safety inspections happen but don't have teeth. The legal and regulatory framework is present but defanged. This is the most recognizable thing about Springfield. Not the cartoon physics or the yellow skin or the radiation or the coma. The economic and political structure that maintains the status quo by making the status quo the safest available option for every individual actor within it. This is not science fiction. This is how company towns work. This is how political corruption functions in real communities. This is how power maintains itself, not through visible force, but through the invisible architecture of dependency. Springfield is an extreme and cartoon version of a very real thing. That's why it resonates. That's why 36 years later it still reads as satire rather than fantasy. Because the structure it depicts is the structure that many people live inside, in less extreme and less funny forms. Apu Nahasapi Mapetalon and the Quick E-Mart occupy an interesting position in Springfield's economic structure. Apu runs the town's primary convenience store, a franchise operation that is, within the show's universe, a large national chain. He works extraordinarily long hours. He is, by any measure, an extremely hard worker. He is also, in a town that treats him as an outsider despite his decades of residence and business operation, perpetually marginal to Springfield's social power structure. The Quick E-Mart serves the town. It's open when nothing else is. It provides basic goods and services at odd hours. It is, in a functional sense, essential to daily life in Springfield. And Apu, who operates this essential service, is never quite inside the circles of power and belonging that define Springfield's social life. He is used by the town without being fully incorporated into it. The show has grappled with this over the years, with varying degrees of success and sensitivity. The character as originally conceived is a caricature. Later seasons have made various attempts to add complexity and humanity to him. The criticism the character has attracted from South Asian communities in the United States reflects a genuine problem with how the show originally approached the question of representation. And the way the show has responded to that criticism, which has not been entirely satisfying to everyone involved, reflects the difficulty of trying to correct a 30-year-old choice within the constraints of a long-running production. What remains true, underneath the complications of the character's history, is that Apu's position in Springfield's economy and society tells you something real about how the town works. Essential service providers who are not considered full members of the community. People who are used without being fully included. The structure that makes their work necessary while treating their presence as incidental. Springfield's relationship to its service economy, to the people who keep it running in the background, is one of the show's less celebrated but more honest observations about American economic life. Number, Deep Dive Expansion, The Children of Springfield. Let the quiet deepen around you. We've talked about the Simpson children in some detail, but Springfield has other children whose stories intersect with and illuminate the central families. Milhouse Van Houten has been Bart's best friend since the beginning of the show. He is, in some ways, Bart's shadow. Wherever Bart goes, Milhouse follows, usually to his own detriment. He is less confident, less physically capable, more anxious, more earnestly invested in the friendship than Bart quite returns. He has a crush on Lisa that the show has maintained across the entire run as a kind of ongoing low-level comedy, the inevitability of unrequited feeling. Milhouse's home life is complicated. His parents' marriage collapses across the show's early seasons, in one of the show's most sustained, realistic emotional storylines. Kirk and Luann Van Houten's divorce affects Milhouse in ways the show handles with more care than it sometimes applies. He splits time between two households. He watches his father struggle to maintain dignity and independence after the marriage ends. He absorbs the particular anxiety of a child whose home has become unstable. And yet Milhouse is, for all of this, not a tragic figure in the show's handling of him. He is a sad figure, often, and a figure of comedy, often. But the show maintains in him a genuine sweetness and a persistent, touching belief in his friendship with Bart and in the possibility that things might go better for him someday. He is not defeated. He keeps showing up. Under the radiation theory, Milhouse's particular anxious energy could be read as a specific expression of the town's general cognitive and neurological alteration, manifesting in his case as heightened anxiety and diminished confidence rather than Homer's diminished intelligence or Maggie's amplified it. Same contamination, different expression. Nelson Muntz is Springfield Elementary's resident bully, and his home life, which the show has depicted across multiple episodes, is genuinely bleak. Nelson's mother is periodically absent in ways that leave him effectively unsupervised. His father is even more absent, a figure of rumor and occasional comic appearance but no stable presence in Nelson's life. Nelson has raised himself largely in the gaps between adult attention. What's interesting about Nelson, and what the show has handled with unexpected grace across the years, is that beneath the bullying, beneath the laugh that has become his signature, there is a child who desperately wants connection and doesn't know how to get it, except through the dynamics he learned when connection was not available. He befriends Bart because Bart is someone who exists outside normal social structures in ways that Nelson can relate to. He has a relationship with Lisa at one point that is genuinely tender and which shows you what Nelson is like when the bullying persona isn't necessary. The show uses Nelson to ask a question it doesn't fully answer. What does a child become when the community fails to care for him? Nelson is Springfield's child. He was produced by the conditions of the town as much as by any individual choice. The adults around him were too absorbed in their own concerns, too affected by whatever Springfield does to its residents' attention and care, to notice or intervene in his situation. And Nelson grew up accordingly. Bart's relationship with Nelson, with Milhouse, with the other kids at Springfield Elementary is one of the show's most consistent through lines. Bart is a social creature. He needs community. He finds it in the irregular, imperfect community of children who have similarly figured out that the adult world has certain gaps that children can exploit. The childhood community they form is not entirely healthy, but it is theirs. It is the version of belonging available to them in Springfield. Database, Martin Prince, Sherry and Terry, the Van Houten kid who is just Milhouse. The recurring children of Springfield form a miniature society with its own rules and hierarchies that run parallel to, but separate from the adult social structures of the town. They see things the adults miss. They have freedom of movement that adults don't. They exist in the margins of Springfield's formal social life. And in those margins they build something small and impermanent and real. This is one of the things the show has always done well, treating the children's world as a real world, with genuine stakes and genuine social complexity. Bart's problems with his popularity, with his position in the school hierarchy, with his relationship to the adults who have authority over him, are not played as simply cute. They are the problems of a person navigating a real social landscape with real consequences. And Bart's fundamental problem, the one the show returns to across many seasons, is that he is smart enough to see through most of the systems around him, but not quite educated enough, not quite supported enough, to build anything constructive with that insight. He can see through the school. He can see through the authority structures. He can identify the gaps and the hypocrisies and the places where the official version doesn't match reality. But what he builds with that perception is mostly mischief, because mischief is the tool available to someone with his particular combination of insight and disadvantage. There's a version of Bart that becomes something remarkable. The show has gestured toward this in various episodes, moments where Bart applies his energy constructively and discovers that it works, that he can succeed at things that are not pranks. These moments never quite stick. Springfield, and the narrative demands of a show that needs Bart to remain essentially Bart, pulls him back. But the glimpses are there. The potential is visible. It's just not being given what it needs to develop. Under the coma theory, Bart's perpetual 10-year-old stasis is particularly affecting in the context of fatherhood. Homer, if he is dreaming, keeps Bart at 10 because 10 is the Bart he knows, the age at which Bart existed in his memory when the vending machine fell. Bart older, Bart growing towards something, Bart becoming whatever he becomes. Homer's unconscious mind cannot generate that. It can only hold Bart where it last saw him, permanently mischievous, permanently young, permanently the kid who played the April Fool's prank that started the whole sequence that ended in the coma. There is something particularly painful about that. If the coma theory is true, then the thing that put Homer into the coma, the prank that escalated, was Bart's doing. And Homer's last real memory of Bart is as the kid who, however accidentally, was responsible. His love for Bart in the dream, his willingness to strangle him and laugh with him and be endlessly exasperated by him, is the love of someone who cannot quite hold the complicated truth of what Bart did and who Bart is. So the dream simplifies it. Bart is the kid. Bart is always the kid. And Homer loves him in the uncomplicated way that doesn't require thinking too hard about what complicated things Bart is capable of. Number. Deep dive expansion. The philosophical dimension of Springfield. We're getting very deep into the night now. The show has one more thing to say that we haven't quite addressed yet, and it's the most abstract thing, the one that sits behind all the specific theories and observations. The Simpsons is a show about how we understand time. Not just in the floating timeline sense, though that's part of it, about the human relationship to the past, the present, and the imagined future, about nostalgia and what it costs, about the impulse to hold things in place versus the reality that everything moves and changes and eventually ends. Every theory we've explored tonight is, at some level, a theory about time. The radiation theory is about cumulative damage over time, about what decades of exposure do to bodies and minds. The coma theory is about time stopped, about a man suspended in a permanent present outside the normal flow. The principle and the pauper theory is about a community's relationship to its own history, about the choice to suppress the past to preserve the present. Burns's immortality theory is about the refusal of time itself, the engineering of existence beyond the normal temporal limit. And the floating timeline, which is the show's most visible and most discussed formal characteristic, is the clearest expression of the central philosophical question the show has been asking since 1989. What would it mean if time actually stopped? If the people you love never changed? If the moments you remember most clearly stayed frozen and accessible forever? The answer the show gives, episode by episode across 36 years, is complicated. On one hand, the freeze is beautiful. Homer's family is preserved. The children remain young. The love that was present in 1989 is still present now, unchanged and unchanging. There is something in this that speaks to the deepest human longing, the wish that the people we love would stay, would never grow up and away and different, would remain exactly as they are in the moments when we love them most. On the other hand, the freeze is a death. Nothing can grow in Springfield. Nothing can develop. The children are denied the maturation that is their birthright. Homer is denied the experience of watching his children become adults. Marge is denied the expansion of self that becomes possible when the immediate demands of raising young children ease. Everyone in Springfield is suspended in a version of themselves that was true once, at a particular moment, and which the town keeps insisting is still the full truth even as the world outside changes around them. The show has diagnosed this as a specifically American condition. The longing for a past that was simpler, warmer, more coherent than the present. The refusal to let go of the version of life that felt most like home. The organization of the cultural imagination around a set of images and relationships that belong to a particular historical moment. held in place long past the point where that moment remains accurate. Springfield is a town built on nostalgia, not the gentle, honest kind that acknowledges what was good about the past while accepting the present, the other kind. The kind that insists the past was better and refuses to acknowledge the ways it wasn't. The kind that keeps the family on the couch and the beer cold and the kids young and the town the way it was, because the alternative is admitting that time has passed and things have changed, and the world you remember no longer exists. Burns is the oldest expression of this, a man who has spent more than a century refusing to accept what time wants to do to him, using every available resource to hold back the biological clock, maintaining himself in a state of functional existence past any reasonable endpoint. The town, under the radiation theory or the collective denial theory, is doing the same thing on a collective scale, holding itself in place, refusing the changes that time ordinarily brings, maintaining the permanent present at the cost of authentic development. And the coma theory frames this most starkly. Homer in the coma is the purest expression of the human refusal to let go. His unconscious mind generates an entire world, complete with characters and storylines and decades of apparent history, for the single purpose of keeping the family together, keeping the moment of love alive, not moving forward, not growing, just staying, in the house on Evergreen Terrace, as long as possible. We, the audience, are complicit in this. We keep the loop running by watching, by returning each season, by engaging with the theories and the analysis and the 36 years of accumulated knowledge about a fictional family in a fictional town. Every time we watch, we tell the show that we want the loop to continue. We tell Homer's dreaming mind that the simulation is worth sustaining. We tell Springfield that we're not ready for it to end. The show will end someday, all shows do, and when The Simpsons finally concludes, it will be the end of the longest-running chapter in the history of American animated television. It will also be, in a real sense, the loss of a particular kind of permanence. The Springfield that never changes will change. The family that never ages will be aged by the fact of ending. And we will have to acknowledge, finally, that those 36 years have passed, that we're older, that the world has changed, that the couch and the house and the family we kept returning to were always temporary, were always a dream, were always the most beautiful kind of fiction, the kind that feels, for the duration of its telling, exactly like home. The Simpsons is not just a show, it's a promise. Every episode is a renewal of the promise. The family will be here when you come back. The house will be warm. The beer will be cold. Homer will come through the door and everything will be ridiculous, and nothing will ever quite be okay, and it will be okay anyway. That promise has been kept for 36 years. Against all odds, against the normal trajectory of long-running television, against the entropy that eventually claims everything, Springfield has stayed. And maybe that's the last and most important theory of all. Not the radiation, or the coma, or the denial, or the conspiracy. But this. The Simpsons exists because we need it to exist. Because the world outside Springfield is difficult and exhausting and full of changes we didn't authorize. And Springfield is always there. Always yellow. Always warm. Always a little broken in ways that feel familiar. Always home. Close your eyes now. Springfield will be there when you wake up. It always is. Number. Extended deep dive. The secondary characters as a complete map of Springfield. There's still time. The night holds. Let's walk through the rest of Springfield at a slow, unhurried pace, because every corner of this town has something to show us if we give it enough attention. We haven't talked much about Chief Wiggum. Clancy Wiggum is Springfield's chief of police, and he is, in narrative terms, the person most responsible for ensuring that nothing in Springfield is ever properly investigated or held accountable. He is cheerfully incompetent in a way the show plays as comedy, but which, under the lens of the theories we've explored, starts to look like something more purposeful. Wiggum solves almost nothing. Crimes go uninvestigated. Evidence is mishandled. Suspects are overlooked, and innocent people are occasionally accused. The Springfield Police Department, under Wiggum's leadership, is a law enforcement apparatus that law enforcement would not recognize as its own. And this matters specifically because of the show's accumulated wrongdoings. Three-eyed fish, human skeletons in a nuclear facility basement, a billionaire who has committed documented environmental crimes for decades, a principal who is a documented identity fraud, a shooting investigation that resulted in charges never filed against anyone capable of being charged. All of these require a functioning law enforcement apparatus to address. And Springfield's law enforcement apparatus, headed by Clancy Wiggum, is definitionally not that. Whether Wiggum is corrupt in the conscious sense, actively taking direction from Burns or looking the other way for personal benefit, or simply incompetent in a way that has the same effect, is a question the show leaves open. The outcomes are identical either way. The wrong things are not investigated. The right things are overlooked. The status quo is maintained through the failure of the mechanism designed to disrupt it. Wiggum's son Ralph is one of the show's most beloved background characters. Ralph exists in a particular category of Simpsons characters, the ones whose function should be comic but who, if you look at them for more than a moment, open into something surprisingly poignant. Ralph says things that are literally nonsensical. He exists in a slightly different relationship to consensus reality than everyone else in Springfield. He is gentle, unguarded, apparently incapable of the social calculation that most people apply instinctively. He says what he thinks, or rather what he perceives, without the filter that most people develop by the time they're old enough for elementary school. The show has played this as pure comedy, and it works as comedy. But Ralph is also a child whose father is the chief of police, in a town where the chief of police is the primary mechanism by which wrongdoing goes unaddressed. Ralph has grown up in a household shaped by Wiggum's particular blend of good intentions and absolute dysfunction. What Ralph is partly an expression of what that household produces. And Ralph's moments of accidental wisdom, because there are such moments, the things Ralph says that are literally nonsensical and also somehow true, are the show using the character to deliver observations that the other characters are too defended to offer. Ralph doesn't have a filter. Ralph doesn't have the social calculations that make other characters unable to say certain things out loud. So Ralph says them in forms that are literally incoherent but that carry something recognizable inside the incoherence. He is Springfield's fool. In the Shakespearean sense, the character who speaks truth in a form that can't quite be held against him because the form is too strange to count. Now let's talk about the school. Springfield Elementary is a public school, and the show has depicted it across the years as an institution in various stages of financial and functional distress. The budget is perpetually inadequate. The facilities are run down. The teachers are a mixture of the genuinely committed, the burned out, and the simply strange. The school is trying to do what schools are supposed to do in conditions that make that genuinely difficult. Mrs. Krabappel, Bart's teacher for most of the show's run, was one of the show's most complex recurring characters. She was burned out, yes. She had clearly arrived at a point in her career where the idealism that presumably led her into teaching had been worn down by decades of underfunding, difficult students, and the particular demoralizing experience of watching a system fail repeatedly without consequence. But she was also, underneath the burnout, someone who had genuine investments in the children she taught. Her relationship with Bart is one of the show's most interesting dynamics. The mutual recognition between a difficult child and a tired teacher who is, despite everything, still paying attention. The show handled Mrs. Krabappel's death, following the real-world death of the actress Marcia Wallace, with real care and respect. It did something unusual for a long-running animated show. It acknowledged the loss within the show's universe, let the characters grieve, and found a way to honor the character by allowing her absence to mean something. This was, in a small way, Springfield allowing time to pass, allowing change, allowing the loss of something permanent, even within the permanent present. It was one of the show's most honest moments, and it was made possible because the show had spent many years making Mrs. Krabappel real enough that her loss actually registered. Groundskeeper Willie is another of the school's fixtures, a character the show has used primarily for comic purposes. His Scottish accent, his extraordinary physique, his volatility, his various romances, but who has also been given genuine pathos at various points. He is perpetually employed by the school at the lowest possible position, doing the physical labor of maintaining a facility that is perpetually underfunded. He takes genuine pride in this labor. He has strong opinions about it. And he is essentially invisible to the institutional powers of the school except when something needs cleaning or fixing. Willie is the working-class heart of Springfield Elementary. He has no institutional power, no social status, no particular community. What he has is competence at the job he does, and a fierce, sometimes bewildering pride in that competence. The show periodically gives him moments where that competence matters, where his particular skills are the thing that resolves the situation. These moments are usually comic, but they're also the show's acknowledgement that the people doing the unglamorous work of keeping institutions functioning are not incidental to those institutions. The relationship between the school and Burns, specifically the oil well that Burns stole from beneath the school's grounds in Who Shot Mr. Burns, is worth revisiting in the context of the school's chronic underfunding. The school was, briefly, on the verge of genuine financial stability because of that oil discovery. Burns took it, and the school returned to its default state of inadequacy. The moment of potential was specifically destroyed by the power structure that keeps Springfield in its particular configuration. This is the show being explicit about something it usually handles obliquely. The resources that could improve life in Springfield keep being extracted by the people at the top of the power structure. The oil well, the school's budget, the town's environmental health. These things exist in Springfield. They exist in forms that could make the place better, fairer, more livable, and they keep getting taken. Now let's talk about Reverend Lovejoy, because Lovejoy is the spiritual authority of Springfield, and the show's treatment of him reveals a great deal about the town's relationship to faith and organized religion. Timothy Lovejoy, the minister at the First Church of Springfield, is a man who appears to have lost his enthusiasm for pastoral care somewhere around the third or fourth decade of his ministry. He delivers sermons with a flat, uninflected delivery that suggests he is going through motions he stopped believing in a long time ago. He is available, technically, for pastoral counseling, but the actual work of listening and caring and responding to what he hears has been largely replaced by a reflexive advice to have you tried not sinning. He is the counterweight to Ned Flanders. Ned has too much faith, of the wrong kind. Faith that is a cage rather than a freedom. Lovejoy has the appearance of faith without its substance, the institutional trappings of a religious life without the actual religious investment. Between them, they encompass the show's most honest critique of how faith functions in Springfield. It's performed. It's social. It marks membership in a community and adherence to certain conventions. But the actual encounter with the sacred, the thing that religious practice is supposed to be aimed toward, is largely absent. And God, who the show has established actually exists and is willing to have conversations with Homer Simpson, has apparently not found occasion to show up at Lovejoy's church. The institution of faith in Springfield is present and hollow. The actual divine presence, such as it is within the show's universe, circulates elsewhere, in the woods behind the power plant, in Homer's coma dreams, in the moments between jokes where something true briefly surfaces. Lovejoy's wife Helen is, as mentioned earlier, the town's most vocal guardian of public propriety. She forms, with Lovejoy, a kind of institutional couple. She enforces the social norms outwardly. He maintains the religious apparatus that gives those norms their official sanction. Neither of them appears particularly concerned with the spirit of what they're maintaining. The form is what matters. The appearance of a community that has values. Whether those values are actually operative in how the community functions is a question neither of them is much invested in answering. The Hibbert family represents Springfield's medical establishment. Dr. Julius Hibbert is the town's primary physician, a cheerful, competent doctor who responds to almost every diagnosis, however grim, with a warm chuckle. He is likable. He is professionally accomplished. He has the comfortable life of someone who has done well in his chosen field. And across the show's run, he has been the physician responsible for failing to notice the crayon in Homer's brain, failing to adequately explain the three-eyed fish's implications, failing to raise alarm about the various radiation-adjacent conditions that presumably present in his Springfield patient population. Whether Hibbert is actively complicit in Springfield's collective denial, or simply operating within it as a matter of professional and social survival, is another of the show's open questions. He's not depicted as a villain. He's depicted as a comfortable, slightly oblivious member of Springfield's professional class who has arranged his life so that his comfort doesn't require him to look too hard at the uncomfortable implications of what his practice shows him. He laughs. He always laughs. The laugh is his signature, and it's also the thing that keeps you from pressing him too hard on anything. Hard to confront someone who responds to confrontation with warm, disarming laughter. The Flanderses broadly, beyond Ned, deserve attention. Rod and Todd, Ned's sons, are children raised in the most deliberately sheltered environment Springfield Elementary contains. They don't watch television, or watch only very selective programming. They don't engage with popular culture except through the filter of their father's faith. They are, in most episodes, presented as extremely innocent, to a degree that reads as either funny or concerning, depending on how you look at it. What the show has never quite addressed is what happens to Rod and Todd as they grow up. What do children raised this way become? The show can't tell us because nobody grows up in Springfield. But the question is there. Children shaped by extreme sheltering and behavioral shaping, and a framework of faith that doesn't allow certain kinds of questioning. What kind of adults do they become when the framework they were raised in meets the reality of a world that operates quite differently? The show has hinted in small ways that even Rod and Todd are not entirely the docile figures their upbringing is designed to produce. There are moments, passed over quickly, where something more complicated surfaces under the compliance. The show is too gentle with the Flanders children to pursue this, but it's there. Number extended deep dive. The Simpsons' relationship to American history. We're still here. The night is long and Springfield has more to show us about itself. The Simpsons exists in a particular relationship to American history that most discussions of the show don't fully examine. The show began in 1989, at a very specific moment. The end of the Cold War, the beginning of what was expected to be a period of American stability and prosperity, the last years before the cultural shifts of the 1990s fully took hold. The America of late 1989 was a country that felt, in certain ways, like it was at a turning point, about to enter something new. The Simpsons arrived at that turning point and did something interesting. It looked backward. The show was already, in its earliest episodes, a show about the American past as much as the American present. Homer and Marge's backstory was rooted in the 1970s. The town of Springfield carried the architecture and culture of mid-century American life. The show was, in some sense, always a nostalgia project, even before it was old enough to be nostalgic about its own history. This relationship to the past has deepened over time. As the show has run through 3.5 decades, it has accumulated its own history, its own past that viewers carry with them into each new episode. The early seasons are now historical artifacts in a way they weren't when they aired. The golden age of the show, the period that most fans identify as its best work, is now 30 years ago. The show's relationship to its own past has become as complicated as its relationship to American history. The floating timeline interacts with this in interesting ways. Because the timeline floats, because the characters don't age, the show's present is always contemporary. But the show's past is fixed at various points that recede further into history with each passing year. The episodes from the early 1990s are now period pieces, as surely as any film from that era. They carry the cultural markers of their specific historical moment. The references, the technology, the assumptions about what American life looked like and felt like. Watching them now is watching something historically specific as well as something timeless. And the show knows this. It has, particularly in later seasons, engaged explicitly with its own history, with what it means to have been running this long, with the particular experience of being a cultural institution that was young and vital once and now carries the weight of its own accumulated past. Burns's relationship to American history, which we've discussed, is the show's most extreme version of this dynamic. Burns has lived through American history, all of it. He was there. He participated. He made deals and took positions and shaped events in ways that the show only partially reveals. He is, in this sense, the show's embodiment of the idea that the past doesn't end, that the people and power structures of earlier historical moments persist, in altered forms, into the present. That the weight of the past is not just metaphorical but structural, literally built into the institutions and power arrangements of the present. The town of Springfield itself carries its history and its geography. The power plant sits where it sits because Burns chose to build it there, at a point in the town's development when the regulatory environment allowed it. The school sits where it sits because it was built at some earlier point when the community had a different relationship to public education. The church, the bar, the police station, the nuclear plant, the geography of Springfield is a record of decisions made over time by people, some of whom are still around and some of whom aren't, that have shaped the conditions everyone currently lives within. This is how actual communities work. The decisions of the past, the location of a factory, the route of a highway, the zoning of a neighborhood, shape the present in ways that the people living in the present often can't see clearly because they're inside the results. Springfield's current configuration, including its particular set of dysfunctions and absurdities, is the accumulated result of choices made over decades, most of which were made by or for the benefit of the same small number of powerful actors. The show's relationship to American political history is also worth examining. The Simpsons has engaged with American politics across its entire run, from specific political figures to broad political dynamics. The Trump prediction we've discussed at length. The show has also engaged with political corruption, with electoral dynamics, with the gap between democratic aspiration and democratic reality. One episode, Mr. Burns, the episode where Burns runs for governor, is one of the show's most direct engagements with the question of money in politics. Burns's campaign is funded without limit. His advertising is ubiquitous. His opponents are outspent and outmaneuvered. And the specific thing that defeats him is not a better funded or better organized opposition, but the three-eyed fish, a moment of environmental evidence that becomes a story that the money can't quite overcome, at least in the episode's telling. The show is optimistic in that episode in a way it usually isn't. Evidence matters. Environmental damage made visible and undeniable can defeat money in an election. This has not consistently proven to be the show's most accurate political prediction. But the episode encodes a hope that the show doesn't entirely abandon. That truth, if it becomes sufficiently visible and undeniable, has some purchase even against enormous financial power. Homer's work at the power plant is, as we've discussed at length, both a personal story about the damage Burns did to his family and a broader political story about the relationship between capital and labor in American life. Homer is a union member, technically. The show has depicted this across various episodes. The union is not particularly powerful. Its protections don't prevent Homer from being subject to Burns's whims. The collective bargaining that should protect workers is present as a formality without much actual force. Homer's job security comes from a private deal between his father and his employer, not from the union that should be his institutional protection. This is the show being accurate about how American labor relations have actually evolved across the decades of the show's run. The formal structures of worker protection, the union, the regulatory framework, the safety oversight, exist in Springfield as in America. Their effectiveness, in both cases, is considerably less than the formal structures suggest. The gap between what worker protections are supposed to do and what they actually do is the gap that Homer falls into and that Burns fills. The show's most directly political engagement may be the episode where Lisa discovers that the town's founder, Jebediah Springfield, was not the heroic figure of local legend, but a pirate, a liar, and a hypocrite. The episode is called Lisa the Iconoclast, and it's one of the best things the show ever made. Lisa discovers documentary evidence that the founding myth is false. She tries to share this truth. The town rejects it. The local historian, who has dedicated his life to the Jebediah legend, initially denies the evidence and then, crucially, eventually acknowledges it but decides that the legend serves an important function regardless of its truth. This is the show's most direct engagement with the question of foundational myths. American history is built on a set of founding narratives that don't survive close examination. The show doesn't just observe this. It asks the harder question. Given that the myths are false, what do you do with them? The historian's answer, and perhaps the show's own position, is complicated. The myths have produced something real. The community organized around them has genuine value. The pride people take in the shared story has genuine psychological and social function. Does exposing the falseness of the foundation destroy the building? Lisa ultimately decides not to expose the fraud. Not because she's comfortable with the lie, but because she's decided that this is not the right moment, or that she's not the right person, or that the cost of the exposure exceeds the benefit. It's a compromise that doesn't fully satisfy her, and the show doesn't pretend it fully satisfies. Lisa walks in the town parade, watching the celebration of a myth she knows to be false, and the show holds that discomfort without resolving it. This is the show at its most honest about the relationship between truth and community. Communities run on shared stories. Some of those stories are false. Exposing the falsehood can destroy the community that organized itself around it. And sometimes communities, knowing the story is false, choose to maintain it anyway, because the alternative is worse. Springfield has made this choice explicitly, in The Principal and the Pauper. Lisa makes it personally, in Lisa the Iconoclast. And the show asks, what kind of place is this? And what kind of people does this make us? The answer is complicated and unresolved and very American. Number Number Extended Deep Dive Marge and the Invisible Labor of Springfield. The night is very quiet now. Let's spend some time with the character who holds everything together and who the show has, across 36 years, never quite given her full due. Marge Simpson is the most important character in The Simpsons. This is not a popular argument. Homer is the protagonist, the center of most episodes, the character whose perspective organizes the show's reality. Burns is the structural antagonist. Lisa is the moral conscience. Bart is the anarchic energy. Maggie is the mystery. But Marge is the thing that makes any of it possible. Without Marge, the Simpson family does not hold together. Without Marge, Homer's love has no stable object. Without Marge, the house on Evergreen Terrace is not a home. Without Marge, the show has no emotional center. Marge chose this. This is important. The show has established across multiple flashback episodes that Marge had options. She was smart. She was capable. She had interests and ambitions that were her own, separate from the family she would eventually build with Homer. She was not forced into the life she has. She made choices, some of them under pressure and in circumstances that weren't entirely fair, but choices nonetheless. She chose Homer. She chose Springfield. She chose the house on Evergreen Terrace and the family and the particular combination of joy and frustration that comes with it. The show has, across the years, periodically examined what it means for Marge to have made those choices. What she gave up, what she gained, what she continues to give, and what she continues to receive. The answers are not always comfortable. There are episodes where Marge's suppressed aspirations surface and demand attention, where she briefly does something other than what she's always done, and where the show asks honestly whether her life has been large enough for her. These episodes usually resolve in a way that reaffirms Marge's commitment to her family without entirely dismissing the validity of what she was reaching for. She doesn't sacrifice herself for the family in a way that erases her selfhood, but she does repeatedly choose the family over other possibilities, and the show honors that choice without fully romanticizing it. Marge's patience is real but not infinite. The show has depicted her at her limits multiple times. When Marge snaps, which is rare but happens, the effect is disproportionate precisely because her equanimity is so consistent. The moments where she can no longer maintain the patience reveal what's underneath. Not a simpler or emptier version of her, but someone who has been managing enormous complexity for a very long time and who has, for a moment, run out of the management capacity that makes the complexity livable. Homer's love for Marge is one of the show's most consistent and most genuine through lines. Whatever else changes across 36 seasons, whatever episodes fail or disappoint or miss the mark, Homer's love for Marge remains. It's not sophisticated love. It doesn't involve particularly refined understanding or articulateness about what she means to him. But it is deep and real and reliable in a way that very few things in Springfield are reliable. The show has threatened this relationship across many episodes. Marge has flirted with leaving, with finding someone who understands her better, with accepting a version of her life that doesn't include Homer. These threats are almost always resolved in Homer's favor, because the show cannot destroy its central relationship. But they are not false threats. The show takes them seriously enough that the resolution doesn't feel entirely automatic. What Marge sees in Homer, what she has always seen, is something that the show has spent 36 years building the case for. Beneath all of Homer's limitations, beneath the crayon and the radiation and the accumulated damage of a childhood shaped by Burns's malice, there is something real, a genuine warmth, a genuine love for his family that expresses itself badly and inconsistently, but that runs all the way down. A goodness that is inarticulate and often ineffective, but that is not performed. Marge chose Homer because she saw that, and she keeps choosing Homer because it's still there, even after everything. Marge is also the character who most clearly sees what Springfield is and chooses to stay in it anyway. She is not cognitively impaired the way Homer is. She is not sheltered from reality by Ned's behavioral programming. She is not distracted by power and wealth like Burns. She is not absorbed in a particular passion or obsession that narrows her vision. Marge sees Springfield relatively clearly, including its dysfunction, including what it is and isn't for her family, and she stays. Not because she can't leave, not because she doesn't see the problems, but because this is home, because the people she loves are here, because whatever Springfield's failures, it is the place where her life has happened, where her children are growing up, where her marriage exists. Marge's relationship to Springfield is the most honest one in the show. She is under no illusions about it. She just loves it anyway, specifically because of the people in it, not despite its flaws but alongside them. This is the show's final position on Springfield, expressed through Marge. Not the radiation theory's horror, not the coma theory's tragedy, not the denial theory's complicity, but something more ordinary and more human than any of those. The decision to love a place, imperfect as it is, because the people you love are in it. The decision to stay, because staying is how you honor the things that matter. The decision to keep the house warm, and the family fed, and the door open, even in a town with cracked cooling towers and a three-eyed fish, and a billionaire who was alive before the 20th century. Marge keeps the loop running not because she's trapped in it, but because she chooses to. Because the loop contains the family she loves. Because ending the loop means losing them, and losing them is the one thing she won't do. And in this, Marge and Homer are more similar than they might appear. Homer's coma dream, if the theory is right, is the same choice in a different form. The refusal to let the family go, the commitment to the loop over the alternative, the love that keeps the story running past any reasonable endpoint. Homer does it in a coma. Marge does it in waking life. The choice underneath the different forms is the same. Stay. Love them. Keep the house warm. Keep the door open. Come home. Come home every episode to the same couch, the same family, the same chaotic warmth of Evergreen Terrace. Springfield will be here when you wake up. Because we love it enough to keep it running. Because they're still there. Because we're still watching. Because some things, once they mean something, mean it forever. Number, final extended section. The show's legacy and what comes after Springfield. The night is at its deepest point now. The hour between very late and very early, when the world outside is completely still. And there's one more thing worth sitting with before we close the lights on Springfield for tonight. The Simpsons changed what television could be. This is not hyperbole. Before The Simpsons, animated series for general audiences were largely confined to a particular set of expectations. They were for families. They operated within certain conventions about content, tone, and sophistication. The idea that an animated show could be the smartest, most culturally engaged, most formally ambitious thing on network television was not an established possibility in 1989. The Simpsons made it possible. It demonstrated, across its first several seasons, that animation was a medium capable of supporting exactly the kind of nuanced, politically engaged, emotionally complex storytelling that had previously been considered the exclusive territory of live-action drama and comedy. It opened a door that would not close again. Everything that followed, every animated show for adults that has existed in the decades since, exists in the space The Simpsons opened. South Park, Futurama, Family Guy, Archer, Bob's Burgers, Rick and Morty, all of them would not exist in their current forms without the precedent The Simpsons established. Some of them are more explicit about this debt than others, but the debt is real. And yet The Simpsons itself has never quite received the same recognition that the shows it inspired receive. The Golden Age episodes are acknowledged as classics. But the show as a whole across its full run is often dismissed. The first 10 seasons were great. Everything after is a decline. This is a crude reading of a complicated record, but it has become the default critical position. What it misses is that The Simpsons, at its worst, is still doing something that very few shows do at their best, providing a sustained, coherent portrait of an American community across an extraordinary span of time. Whatever the quality of any individual episode, the show as a whole is the longest-running ethnography of a fictional American town in the history of television. The accumulation of 36 years of detail, even imperfect detail, even detail that contradicts itself, adds up to something genuinely unprecedented. No other fictional community has been depicted for this long, in this depth, with this much accumulated detail. Not Stars Hollow, not Avonlea, not Walnut Grove, not any of the other beloved fictional small towns that American culture has returned to. Springfield is in a category of its own, and the theories we've explored tonight are a response to that unique depth. They're what happens when the accumulated detail is dense enough to support serious analysis. When the portrait is detailed enough to look for the patterns. The show's influence on comedy specifically is worth examining. The Simpsons essentially created the template for the kind of television comedy that has dominated American culture since the 1990s. Dense, reference-heavy, moving fast, assuming an intelligent and engaged audience. comfortable with multiple emotional registers in a single episode. The show demonstrated that comedy could do anything, that a single episode could be genuinely funny and genuinely sad and genuinely angry and genuinely warm, sometimes within the same scene. That comedy was not a lesser mode of engagement, but a full one. This legacy is complicated by the show's extraordinary longevity. The Simpsons, by still running, continues to generate new material that is measured against the standard its earlier work established. The newer episodes almost inevitably fall short of that standard, not necessarily because they're bad, but because the standard is extraordinarily high, and because the conditions that produce the Golden Age, the particular combination of writers, producers, cultural moment, and creative hunger, cannot be fully replicated across decades. The show has become, in its later years, a kind of living monument. It is studied and analyzed and theorized not primarily because of what it's doing now, but because of what it has done. The current episodes are, for many viewers, less the point than the archive of what came before. The show continues partly out of momentum, partly because the characters and the format have proven durable, and partly because ending it would mean making a formal claim about what it all amounts to that nobody involved is quite ready to make. The question of what The Simpsons ultimately means, what its 36-year run adds up to as a cultural artifact, is one that will probably be answered more clearly in retrospect than it can be in the present. We are still too close to it. We are still inside it, in a sense, still watching, still theorizing, still returning to Springfield. What we can say now is that The Simpsons is one of the most complete portraits of American life that any creative work has ever attempted. Not the most flattering portrait, not the most accurate in the sense of photographic realism, but one of the most sustained and the most honest about certain specific things, about how power operates in communities, about how families contain and fail their members, about how communities organize themselves around comfortable fictions, about how intelligence and goodness and love do and don't translate into improved circumstances, about how the same cycle of hope and disappointment and recovery keeps turning, generation after generation, in the same houses, on the same streets, in the same impossible towns. Springfield is America, not all of it, not the official version, but a recognizable slice of it, rendered in yellow and four-fingered and sustained through some combination of radiation and collective denial and one man's coma dream. A place where the fish have 3 eyes and nobody thinks to ask why, where the most powerful man in town has been alive for a century and a half and nobody thinks to ask how, where a baby shot the billionaire and the case was closed without being solved, where a family sits on the same couch every Sunday night, in the same house, on the same street, in the same town that doesn't appear on any map, and watches television, and is messy and loving and broken and together. That is Springfield, that is the show. That is what we keep coming back to. Not because it's perfect, not because it's always good or always right or always worthy of the best things ever said about it, but because it's there, because it's been there for 36 years, because it will be there next week and next season, and however many years remain before it finally ends. Because the family is on the couch, because Homer is home, because Marge kept the door open, because Bart is still 10 and Lisa is still 8, and Maggie is still watching, still waiting, still somewhere behind that pacifier with her enormous eyes taking everything in. Because Springfield is where we go when we want to go home to a version of America that is recognizable without being real, warm without being comfortable, funny without being dishonest, true without being the whole truth, because the loop holds, because we choose to keep it running, because as long as we're watching, Homer is dreaming us all home. It always is. That's the whole point. That's always been the whole point. Number supplemental section. The overlooked moments that changed everything. There's one more hour before the real morning. Let the words carry you. The Simpsons has a category of episode that gets less attention than the classics, but that reveals something important about how the show works when it's operating at its best. These are the episodes that seem, on the surface, to be about one thing, and reveal themselves to be about something else entirely. Episodes where the comedy is a delivery system for something the show couldn't approach directly. Take the episode where Homer gets a job at a bowling alley. On the surface, it's a story about Homer briefly finding work he actually enjoys. Underneath, it's a story about what happens when a man discovers, late in life, that there's something he's genuinely good at, that brings him genuine satisfaction, and that is incompatible with the life he's already built. The comedy comes from the bowling alley situation. The weight comes from watching Homer have to choose between the life he has and the version of himself that feels most real at the bowling alley. He chooses his family, and the show is honest that this is both the right choice and a kind of loss. Or the episode where Bart gets a failing grade and is told he'll be held back. On the surface, it's a story about studying and academic performance. Underneath, it's a story about how a parent's love gets tested when a child isn't meeting the expected standard, and about what it means to have a child who is struggling with the formal structures of education while possessing intelligence that those structures don't quite measure. Homer's effort to help Bart study reveals something about both of them: Bart's particular relationship to learning and Homer's relationship to his own intellectual limitations, which he navigates with more grace than the show usually credits him with. The show's best episodes almost always operate at two levels simultaneously. The joke is real, the emotion is real, neither one undermines the other, the comedy doesn't drain the feeling. The feeling doesn't compromise the comedy. They coexist, which is the hardest thing any piece of writing can manage, and which The Simpsons, at its best, does better than almost anything else. This two-level quality is what makes the theories about Springfield feel grounded rather than merely ingenious. The radiation theory works not just because the show provides evidence for it, but because it's tracking something the show was already doing at the emotional level, using the contamination of the environment as a metaphor for the ways in which the structures people are born into can limit and damage them without their knowledge or consent. The contamination is literal in the theory, but it's also figurative. Springfield contaminates its residents in ways that have nothing to do with nuclear material, with cycles of disappointment and low expectation and collective denial, and the particular damage that comes from living in proximity to unchecked power for too long. Homer is contaminated, not just by radiation, by his history, by Burns's destruction of his family, by the crayon, by growing up without his mother, by working for decades for the man who took her, by loving his family so much and so clumsily that the love often doesn't land the way he means it to. Homer is contaminated by everything that happened to him before he was old enough to make different choices. And the show loves him anyway. The show loves Homer Simpson the way you love a person who is genuinely, deeply flawed, and genuinely deeply good at the same time. Who causes damage without meaning to, and who loves without reservation. Who is too limited to fully understand his situation, and too loving to stop trying to make it good for the people around him. The show has spent 36 years building the case for Homer Simpson, making the argument that this person, this particular combination of failure and love, deserves to be the center of a story, deserves to have his family, deserves to keep coming home to the house on Evergreen Terrace, even when he has done nothing, in any conventional metric of achievement, to earn it. And the argument the show makes is that love doesn't need to be earned, that the family doesn't love Homer because he has succeeded at being the things that success is supposed to look like. They love him because he is Homer, because he is theirs. Because for all his limitations, for all the crayon and the radiation and the 55 IQ and the 30-plus years of sleeping at the safety console, he comes home, he is there, he tries. That is what The Simpsons has been saying underneath everything else for 36 years. The trying matters, the showing up matters, the coming home matters. Even in Springfield, even in a contaminated town in a floating location with a billionaire who won't die, and a school that won't get better, and a police department that solves nothing, and a fish with 3 eyes in the river. Even there, the trying matters, the coming home matters, the love matters. Homer comes home. Every episode. That's the whole theory. That's the one that explains everything. Not the radiation, not the coma, not the collective denial, not Burns's immortality. All of those are true, in the way things are true in Springfield. But underneath all of them, there is one simpler truth that the show has been building toward for 36 years, and that it delivers every episode with the same reliable warmth. Homer comes home, and that's enough. That has always been enough. Good night.